Good morning and good afternoon, race fans. Welcome back to TRTN for today's coverage of the first of a brand new series here on the Australian Xbox Racing League for the first round of the Southern Summer Endurance Series. As always, I'm Regan Clark. You join us here on what otherwise would appear to be anything besides Summer League conditions here in the region of Styria, namely on the outskirts of Spielberg, at a track that went by many names throughout its life, starting its life as the Österreichring, later the Steiermark Österreichring, and then later the A1ring. Up until 2004, this circuit would be purchased by Dietrich Mateschitz, co-founder of Red Bull GmbH, and would be transformed into the circuit we know today as the Red Bull Ring. Home of the Austrian Grand Prix in both 2- and 4-wheel racing in Formula 1 and MotoGP, it's 10 turns and 2.6 miles of FIA Grade 1. Outside of its glamorous life as the Grand Prix venue for both MotoGP and for Formula 1 for the nation of Austria, it also finds itself as a part of the yearly calendar for DTM, and most recently sees a return by the Ferrari Challenge Europe Series for 2026. Today, though, it's the host of round 1 of 4 in this series, and picking up where things really left off with the folks at AXRL. Long-time viewers of TRTN will remember, of course, when we officially started broadcasting as TRTN, this was the first series we covered, was the Southern Endurance Series. Now we find its effective spiritual successor, the Southern Summer Endurance Series, and of course, as the name would suggest, you'd expect drier, warmer racing, but right here in Austria, it's anything but. Torrential downpour in Styria, set to clear up in roughly the next 30 minutes, but with only 8 minutes left to go in free practice. We'll have to wait and see if that is to be the believed case on the run in towards qualifying. Taking a look at the event format, of course, we're coming to the end of free practice. You join us in the last 8 or so minutes. We started at the last 10 when this broadcast went live. And coming up in the next couple of minutes then will be 30 minutes of qualifying to follow. A staggered qualifying session. First 15 minutes allotted to the GT4 grid, the last 15 to the GT3s. Heading into the race, there are 180 minutes. That's 3 hours of racing expected with a stint timer. Now, this is according to what we observed in the official AXRL server, was 55 minutes and 2 mandatory pit stops of open strategy. So no mandate on tyres and no mandate on fuel. Of course, we've seen how this has played out in the past in other series, and it has been rather eventful indeed. So for the first of 4 rounds coming up here in the Southern Summer Endurance Series, or SSES for shorts, this is going to be quite interesting to see how it plays out in real time. Now, taking a look at said calendar here, we're trying to find the just quickly the information to hand on what that calendar is going to look like. We see here one of 4 rounds. Starting things off here in the Red Bull Ring, we'll be heading to Zandvoort for round 2 of the championship, round 3 over to Imola, and round 4 over to Spa. That'll take us from now till about the start of April, on April 11th being the last round of the championship. Right now, though, we're not long from the beginning of the first qualifying session of the season. Before we get to that point, though, we're on board at the moment with Richard Claffey, now in the brand new number 93 car, for what used to be, I believe, was CTR Racing, is now, as a matter of fact, RTC Racing. So flipped on its head there for the number 93. We'll see here with the Porsche down across the line was 13th fastest. And before we get on to the topic of qualifying, we see the session so far has been towed the line here between Jacob McLean of Macca Motorsport and Jared Sebastiano of Manuel Woodward Motorsports. These two separate by 11 thousandths of a second. And towing the line on what to expect out of today's session before we get into qualifying, looking at the balance of performance across both categories. Starting things off in GT3, we see Aston Martin best in class with 23 kilos shed from the V8 Vantage. Ferrari losing 20 kilos off of the 296. Porsche losing 17 kilos. Bentley losing 6. And then into the positives, Ford, finally not on the short end of the stick, gains 3 kilos, 16 kilos for McLaren and 20 for BMW. Sadly, no data to hand over Mercedes. 2 entries so far, Tim Alexander-Bleich and Catherine Lane in the 63 SRC Motorsports car we see here. Jared Sebastiano in the 888 Manuel Woodward Motorsports car. They're joined by Hudson Manuel himself in that entry to the championship. Moving away from GT3 into the topic of the GT4s, you'll find a much shorter manufacturer list, and this only really accounts for what is currently 4 cars on the grid. We see Liam Mutz, Carson Claus, Angus Dunk, and Grant Schweikert to be your 4 drivers, and their their teammates will be joining them as well today, namely in the 328 and the 56 there, the SRC Motorsports car and the Nova Sport Chevrolets. And we see here There was originally supposed to be a second Nova Sport car. Sadly, has been forced to withdraw for round 1 of the championship. That would have been an Alpine A110. Fantastic little motor from Dieppe, France, manufactured in-house by Alpine, a subsidiary of the Renault Group. They would have been losing 14 kilos alongside Chevrolet, which has come to be the domineering manufacturer of GT4. We find, though, in trying conditions today, it's anything but, as they're losing out to Liam Mutz with the Shanghai Shaggers number 66 AMG, which gains 12 kilos. BMW slap bang in the middle then. Grant Schweikert and his M4 will lose only 2 kilos in the opening round of the championship. Coming up then on 4.5 minutes left to go, taking a look up towards the current run of things then. Jacob McLean of Macca Motorsport leading by 11 thousandths over Jared Sebastiano in second. We find here Anthony Joseph, otherwise known as Toothless, in the aptly named How to Train Your Driver team. He's alongside Jacob Nielsen in the number 98. Shows there's the number 31, but you can see there as the car passed across the screen, it was in fact the number 98. Very bizarre story behind these two, of course, because they were originally set to enter with McLaren, and it was latest on our radar, at least, that they had swapped over toward that of BMW right at the very last second. We'll see whether or not that pays off. We see that the rain has really just gone away on a whim there. The sun does burst through the clouds to give us just a nice little bit of sunlight before the run into qualifying today. Now, sadly, no qualifying predictions to hand at this time. We'll have to wait and see exactly how it unfolds, but taking a look at it at the moment, we do find 3 manufacturers currently tied within 0.2 of a second front to back, and that's all of them on the podium right now: Ford, Mercedes, and BMW, that being McLean, Sebastiano, and Joseph, otherwise Toothless. We see behind them Jared Peters, 4th place, and Jason Leatherby in 5th. Richard Claffey, we saw earlier on with RTC Racing Porsche. They're currently 6th in the session. Now, 2 manufacturers to keep an eye on then would be Porsche and Aston Martin. Of course, sizable improvements on their way. Moreover, history has proven in the last couple of months, to even the last couple of years, they're 2 of the best manufacturers to have when the going gets tough weather-wise. So we'll be very curious to see how this all unfolds come qualifying in a moment's time. That'll be 30 minutes, of course. First 15 will go over to the GT4s at the back of the field. Currently, Mutz fastest in the number 66 Shanghai Shaggers car. And then we have Carson Claus. We saw him actually earlier on this week making his debut over on the Competizione Performance League GT4 Pro-Am Cup America Series. We saw Claus not too long ago. They'll be joined by a teammate in the SRC Motorsports Chevrolet, currently from the pit lane at this time. We see here the number 56. They'll be joined by Tolby on their way into the first qualifying of the season. It's a thin balance here, and will the change in weather conditions give rise to other manufacturers and other teams towards the front of the field, or is it going to be another 2-horse race here between Sebastiano and McLean, between Manuel Woodward Motorsports and Macca Motorsport? This is really the question on our mind, dropping into the last 2 minutes then of free practice. It's a big day for events here on TRTN, one of 3 on the schedule so far. Later on today, we'll be going live with the folks over at HCCL for their multi-class championship as we enter round 5. Funnily enough as well, tying back into our operations here with the Australian Xbox Racing League. We'll actually be heading over to Australia for that round, heading to Bathurst for round 5 of the championship. That comes up later on at 2 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. And then later on in the day at about 4:50 Greenwich Mean Time, we go live for the first round of the Competizione Performance League World Series. That goes live from Silverstone. So it's going to be a fun little trio of events to have today. 3 hours of racing coming up after today's qualifying session. We see making their way out on track, there was Angus Dunk in the 328 Nova Sport car. We've been watching on board with Jacob McLean, who's been leading this session so far. We see experimenting there with the MotoGP layout was that of Dunk. A minute left to go then in free practice. And of course, in a much wider regard, where we have seen quite a few of these drivers before, for some, it is the first time we're seeing them. Andrew Walker with Adept Rigs Racing in the number 942 Aston Martin. One to keep an eye on there, as mentioned before. Aston Martin and Porsche, 2 of the best manufacturers for wet weather racing. So if we are to see conditions much similar to what we had at the start of today's free practice session, and around when we went live, as a matter of fact, in towards the race, things could be looking definitely up in the direction of the 93 and the 942. We also see as well, or at least did see as well for some time, though pray tell, I'm not sure where they've wandered off to, was the duo at the SRC Motorsports Mercedes number 63. That was Tim Alexander Bleich and Catherine Lane. Now, we saw Alexander Bleich not long ago. He was with the Torpedo Racing team at the AXRL Multi-Class Madness round in Kyalami. That was our last major coverage with AXRL before today's event. It's a pity then. I don't seem to know where they've wandered off to, whether or not they've had a disconnect, and evidently not the greatest start of the season. Well, we're at the end of free practice, only a few drivers then down towards the line before the end of free practice, and we can get thick and fast into the talks of qualifying today. We saw there, Anthony Joseph, otherwise Toothless, goes fastest as the weather subsides here in Austria at the end of free practice. We'll see whether or not he can keep the ball rolling on the run in towards qualifying later down the line. We see it's still in and around 11 thousandths of a second separate between McLean and Sebastiano, the pair of them back into the pit lane. And we see heading down towards the line here. Well, actually, I should say heading up away from the line. That's Joe Woodward in the number 83 car. One of two vehicles still awaiting the line. Further down the line there, we saw the 97, but it looks to have invalidated. That was Glob Drip with, I believe that is Manuel Woodward Motorsports, the number 97 car. Very, very nice old school livery there on that one. We'll get into that conversation over the course of the race. Of course, plenty of time to look at each car individually, but not long then from that conversation of the first qualifying of the season. We see Woodward out on track at the moment. They're joined by Maximilian Ratinsky with Apex Matsiova Racing, the number 88 solo entry then of Ratinsky. We've seen him before in GT4. Now we get to see his GT3 debut in the number 88 Ferrari. The only Ferrari on this grid. That did come as quite the surprise with the popularity of the 296. To see it on this grid here for 3 hours of racing, you really would have expected more teams to have gone over to that option of the Ferrari 296. But nonetheless, we will see how things pan out for them later down the line. Well, not long then to the talks of qualifying. As we see down towards the line goes Ratinsky from 12th place, and we do see that the weather has picked back up. So with the 30 minutes of qualifying starting, of course, the first onto the grid, we see a bit of an enthusiastic start from one of the GT3s up front there. But it is the GT4s first, if the regs were telling us anything truthful at the time. We see though, but both sides seem to be a little bit obdurate to get out of the pit lane first. It's sort of a case of watching, if you've ever seen two British people try to squeeze through a door. It's sort of, oh, you first, no, you first, no, you first, I insist. And that seems to be what's going on here at the exit of the pit lane between the GT3s and 4s. Carson Klaus, though, is not wasting any time here with SRC Motorsports, number 56, first out of the fray then. It's going to be curious to see in what is only a 4-car qualifying for GT4 exactly what positions we could come to expect to see this one here. First among the fray, then following them out, you can see Angus Dunk about 10 seconds away. We'll leave you on board here with the 56. We'll be back in just a moment's time. You see, though, hang on just a moment. I think we just lost connection there with the 56. That would make the second SRC car to have connection issues there. So we'll leave you on board with the AMG, alternatively there. So I think we've lost both of the Camaros on their run out. Angus Dunk back in the pit lane at this time. So we leave you on board with Liam Mutz of Shanghai Shaggers Racing. We'll be back in just a moment's time over the course of the first flying laps here of qualifying in round 1 of the Southern Summer Endurance Series. You're going to have to bear with me on that one because I'm going to mess that name up a lot over the course of this season. Quite the tongue twister. Moreover, back in a moment. Apologies there for the interruption. We're back on board then with Liam Mutz in the 66 car. First among the fray then onto the first flying laps of qualifying for the GT4 division. Now when we get down to about 15 minutes left in the session, that's when we get to see the much larger GT3 category unleashed onto the track here today. We do see that the cars have reconnected in now, so we do have 4 vehicles to contend with down in GT4. We had a momentary issue from the leading 56, then leading 56 I should say, but now that has given rise over to the number 66 to be the first onto the timing charts here in qualifying. Of course, quickly glancing back at the balance of performance statistics, and we'll be doing this over the course of qualifying even when we get in towards the GT3s, as we see there. Look to have been... No, never mind. I thought there was another disconnect there for but a moment. So it seems the 469 on its way back out. That's Grant Schweikert of Mango Racing. Looking at the balance of performance, of course, really we're only in the conversation of the bottom three there. Chevrolet, BMW and Mercedes. Alpine a no-show for the opening round of the championship, so it does leave us only with 3 cars to talk about. When discussing it here, I don't think anyone's going to be all too surprised in saying Chevrolet is going to have a disproportionate advantage over Mercedes. When you take a look there, it's a real law of extremes, 14 kilos away from the 6th gen Camaro, a car that doesn't really need much introduction for anyone who's been watching GT4 racing here on TRTN in the last couple of months. And the Mercedes AMG, it's a strong heel to the Camaro's advance to the best manufacturer of GT4 on this game. But with 12 kilos on board, Liam Mutz is really going to have to go above and beyond here in wet and wild conditions, I should say, for the qualifying to follow. So first onto the charts to be Liam Mutz. We'll see what time he lays in at that Mercedes. Down towards the line he goes here at the Red Bull Ring. Now 1:42.477, our benchmark time. Next to the line coming up then the 328 Angus Dunk in the Nova Sport Chevrolet. Seeing them down through turn 9 at Rin, turn 10 at Red Bull Mobile. So you see here, Angus Dunk behind the wheel. I believe that one might actually be out of date there because I'm pretty sure he's joined in this car by another teammate. We see down towards the line then, Dunk fastest in the number 328. Next down towards the line then, a moment ago, that was Grant Schweikert. We're just quickly addressing something at this time, so do bear with us. Oh, no, it appeared to be very much the case that that was the newest graphic available, but I'm pretty sure that 328 is joined by a teammate. Nonetheless, we see down towards the line then the last of the GT4s onto the chart and third fastest for Carson Claus in the number 56 SRC Motorsports Chevrolet. Now, he's joined by Stephen Tolby in this race. We'll see Tolby perhaps a little later on into the race itself. For this time, though, it's going to be Carson Claus behind the wheel for this qualifying session. Of course, we saw him, as mentioned earlier on in the week, in Competizione Performance League. So it's curious to see him now paired up with Stephen Tolby at the SRC Motorsports team, and let's see what these two can do as a pair. Now, it's quite the interesting distribution of cars here, a limited ensemble albeit, but you really would have expected with how strong Chevrolet has been as a manufacturer, it would have been a clear, far and away 1-2, but in the wet conditions here, we've often seen in the past, this is the Achilles heel, this is the kryptonite of the 6th gen Camaro, a car that is quite the formidable bit of kit. 6.2 litre naturally aspirated engine, biggest on the grid by a long shot for the GT4s at least. If we're talking overall, they actually are pitched out by just a single point there. 6.3 litre, the largest engine. That's under the bonnet of the AMGs down in GT3's grid at the moment. We see across the line then Dunk 142.195. Up and ahead of Liam Mutz by 282 thousandths at this time. We see the rebuttal here. Grant Schweikert with BMW across the line sadly was invalid on that last lap, so we'll be getting on board once again with Carson Claus. And Stephen Tolby down through Rint Corner. It's quite the dramatic gap we see there up front between Dunk and Mutz, and you've really got to put that into perspective. That's about just shy of 7/10 clear of the nearest car. Carson Claus down towards the line definitely brings the gap back into where it really should be expected now for Chevrolet at this time. Now away from only 627 thousandths. Meanwhile, Schweikert's back in the pit lane. We're about to see then with Liam Mutz in the 66 AMG. Just over a quarter of a second away from the fastest time in GT4 at the moment. And really the small size of the grid, I will say, just from an observer's point of view, this was kind of something I imagine was always going to happen when you have a multi-class series. And we've seen this play out quite a few times historically to where multi-class, it can be a very hit or miss subject. And already we've seen public sentiment towards the matter is still quite scattered as to whether or not GT4 will continue to have a place in this series by the second round in Zandvoort. Personally, you know, I'm always of the position here that the more variety on the grid, the better. So I think having the dynamic between the GT4s and the GT3s is a splendid thing indeed. The GT4s are fantastic vehicles. As we saw in the multi-class madness, it was a great time out in Kyle Army. But when push came to shove for a mainline series, the majority of people, again, would like to go with GT3. And that's not a surprise. It's just a process of what are they more exposed to. I don't think you're going to have many people on this grid outside of this select few that have been dedicating the majority of their time over to GT4. I mean, I know we've seen it as well, and I hate to sound like a broken record, but we have seen Claus on a number of occasions now, or at least on a number of occasions, singular, when it came to Competizione Performance League, but he didn't do too bad in that opening round that he had this week. We see him down towards the line here. Was previously 6/10 away, stays there over the course of that last lap just gone, so things definitely a little bit slow on the uptake over the course of this qualifying session. Of course, not an awful lot to comment upon when really in the conversation of only 4 vehicles on this grid. Currently 17 cars in all. That makes 18 with the reintroduction there of Grant Scar, the number 68 car. So seeing down towards the line then the 66 Liam Mutz. And what can AMG do then to thwart Chevrolet? We do see a very minor improvement from 282 to 267 between Mutz and Dunk. So it is showing at least, now albeit very small, but still a positive trend nonetheless, that Mercedes is able to catch up and is starting to adapt to these conditions. But as we've seen, there is always a bit of an ebb and flow in these qualifying battles, especially over the front row for any grid, GT4 or GT3. I'm sure we're set to see that a little later down the line when we get back into the topic of GT3's grid. Of course, we had very close action for the majority of that time between the 888 at the front of the field and also between Jacob McLean's car and the number 73. So Manuel Woodward Motorsports and Maka Motorsports set to go head-to-head here. We do see the reintroduction of the 63 of Tim Alexander Bleish and Catherine Lane. They're back on the grid with SRC Motorsports, so we'll see them a little later on in this qualifying session. Next towards the line then, Carson Claus and Stephen Tolby, another SRC Motorsports car. And they make one of 3 teams, actually, before the Manuel Woodward Motorsports team was forced to pull assets out of GT4. Up until about 24 hours ago, they were one of 3 teams to be branching across both categories. The other 2 teams, of course, was Manuel Woodward Motorsports up until today, and also Nova Sport, that were distributing assets amongst the 2 available categories. Now, Nova Sport, we know, were planning to run the 329, and yeah, you can actually see they're having joined the grid from the back. Mitchell Scott. Terrible eyesight I have looking at the SimGrid page at the moment. And they'll be joining us in the 329. You see down towards the line then Liam Mutz once again. Bear in mind, time's starting to tick short here. About 4 minutes left to go. We see there, Mutz now fastest by 100th of a second over Angus Dunk. So we've still some time to play here before the end of GT4's qualifying. What is the rebuttal being planned at this time by Angus Dunk in the former 327, now the 328 of Nova Sports GT4 lineup? He privateers then at Shanghai Shaggers, namely the single driver entry of Liam Mutz, leading this charge then by a gap so small it completely surpasses any and all ability to react. The average human reaction time sits somewhere in the ballpark of about 90 to 110 thousandths of a second. 90 thousandths is where you get up towards athlete level. I mean, this is borderline inhuman. 110 thousandths is in the sort of fight or flight response range. This is simply 10 thousandths of a second. To blink, mind you, is about 110 or 140 thousandths of a second. So we are well beyond the territory to even react, and it is quite literally blink and you'll miss it if you were to see these 2 cars on track at the same time. The difference between them, you'd be talking centimeters up over the noses between the Chevy and the Mercedes. Across the line a moment ago went the number 56 once again, Carson Claus, still stuck at that 6/10 margin away from the fastest time. Now that gap has since been brought up just a small tad there by about a hundredth of a second because of the new time from Mutz. Was 6:27, now 6:37. Nearest to the line was the 66, but it looks like here at the trailing end of GT4's qualifying, Liam Mutz satisfied with what he's been able to do so far, because in the pit lane, Angus Dunk still yet to have made any moves out onto the field. We're getting dangerously closer to that point of no return. So at about the 16-minute 40 mark is where we're going to see the point of no return reached. Down towards the line, Grant Schweikart with Mango Racing. 2.8 seconds in that last lap, stays there. And Division 4 at this time. At a minute and 55 left to go then of the GT4 qualifying before we see let loose the dogs of war that is GT3. Number 66 then, back out on track. So that does tell us one sign clearly here. Liam Mutt's not satisfied with a 142, 185. He is gunning for higher times here, but with the weather not showing any signs of going away in the next 30 minutes, it is set to stay. And according to our radars, that's actually set to pick up. So it's going to get worse for the arrival of the GT3 cars later down the line. So things are going to get more and more challenging. Is there the chance that we're going to see times anywhere faster than this for the GT4s, or have they hit the proverbial glass ceiling? We're heading in towards the pits then at the end of this qualifying session. There goes Carson Claus and Stephen Tolby. SRC third fastest in GT4 at the end of the first qualifying of the season. So nearest to the line, just currently on their way out through Worth Curve, on their way in towards turn 8, turn 9, and then turn 10. Grant Schweikart in the number 469. Now, they've been hanging out back of this field at the moment. Their first race in, relatively new to the field, relatively new to the series as it stands as well. So for Schweikart, this is really an opportunity to sort of have some teething issues worked out, get a lay of the land in GT4, because things could drastically change between now and the next round coming up. Into the next month as it stands. I believe the next round coming up is in March. We'll have to double check the calendars on that as well. Across the line then, Schweikart, sadly, no advancement, even by a single thousandth. And we're about to see here, 7 seconds left to go. You can see the queue already forming at the end of the pit lane here. Lockie Banks at the forefront of it with Manuel Woodward Motorsports following them out there. I believe that is Joe Woodward in the 83. So 2 MWM cars on their way out. Following on their trails, the How to Train Your Driver car. We can see behind the wheel at the moment, that is not Andrew Joseph, Anthony Joseph. Still learning all of the names. Of course, we've known him for the longest time as Toothless. Of course, had a sensational performance in the Multi-Class Madness race in Kyle Army. Now we see him behind the wheel of the 31 amongst this ensemble of cars being released onto the field for GT3. So at the end of GT4's qualifying, the current standings then, Liam Mutt's fastest, Angus Dunk second, Carson Claus third, Grant Schweikart in fourth. So, let loose onto the field, the premier category of this championship. This is what it's all about. On to the topic of the GT3s. Now, we're going to catch on board with the leading GT3 here. We were under the impression it was Lockie Banks. It's actually Glob Drip behind the wheel of the 97 as the field updates there. So, the 97 leading the charge into the first flying laps of GT3's qualifying on board at the moment with the Manuel Woodward Motorsports car of Drip and Banks. And we saw... well, I'm going to say lightly, some rather enthusiastic testing by this team on the run in towards today. Now, I can't show the replays of what it is I've seen, but I want to point this out. I don't think I've ever seen a Mustang fly quite like the way I've seen it fly on the run in towards today. So they've definitely been stress testing, is maybe one more creative use of the word, as we see in the background there. Anthony Joseph up past Joe Woodward. So we'll stay on board with the leading 97. That'll be our benchmark time by which all to be compared against. We see already there the yellow, formerly white flags there being flown down through turn 9. That's so a lot of drivers can coil up and give each other the breathing space for these first flying laps. We see following very close behind then at this time is Anthony Joseph in the number. It shows there as the, well, did previously show us the 31. We now see that being Isaac Peranihi joining the grid from behind these two, but it's Toothless v Drip for the way that the displays currently show. So taking a look then at the GT3 balance of performance, of course we spoke at length over the course of the qualifying session for the GT4s, looking at the GT3s here. The only manufacturer we don't have any information to at this time is AMG. If I'm not mistaken, they're taking a look through that chart. Yes, that does pretty much paint the picture for us. Now, major highlights include Aston Martin at minus 23 kilos, Ferrari at minus 20, and Porsche at minus 17. And then at the broad end of things, McLaren at plus 16 and BMW at 20. For Ford, this is a breath of fresh air, as it were. 3 kilos added onto the Mustang. Now, normally they see things well north of double figures, and it can often get almost a little bit sort of overreactive from balance of performance. groups, whether it be LFM that employs anywhere up to a 20% restrictor on the engine, or in this case pitskill.io, which is the current BOP provider for this series, which has normally seen things way up in towards the 20 kilo range on the Mustangs. So then down towards the line, the number 97 Glob Drip, followed very closely by Anthony Joseph. First two drivers onto the field, then the 97 and the number 31. As we see there, it did, as a matter of fact, cross the line as the 31, but as we see there, now the new fastest driver of the session is the 98 How to Train Your Driver car, the BMW of Anthony Joseph, up by a tenth and 3,000ths. Nearest to the line, the 31, then the 888. So we saw that the actual 31, I should point out as well, which was the trying to get a look here, Isaac Paranihi's car. And that's with the Amateurs team, formerly the assets of the Rene Gracie Racing team. Very well-known group here on AXRL. We've seen them on a multitude of occasions. We see Paranihi behind the wheel of that McDonald's-clad BMW on its way down towards Remus. Meanwhile, in the time since, the 888 went third fastest, and that makes the faster of the two Mercedes cars to have crossed the line recently. Jared Sebastiano up and ahead of Tim Alexander Bleich. So, Manuel Woodward Motorsports outgunning SRC at their own game in the early doors of this qualifying session. Now, bear in mind, I say that as if we haven't burnt through 5 minutes already. So, how time flies when one is having fun. The 470 across the line a moment ago. Jared Peters currently finds himself 10th in the session and up from Mitchell Scott in the 329 Nova Sport car by a factor, looking at it there, in and around the range of 285 thousandths of a second roughly there. I'm not 100% sure. And actually, that's way north of it. 785 thousandths of a second. My word. The maths, not great. Maybe 685. So we've got word from True Oz Gamer saying that the 2020 AMG is plus 5 kilos. So when comparing that, seeing here with Jared Sebastiano and the 888 Manuel Woodward Motorsports car on his way down through turn 9 and 10 at this time, getting into that conversation again just briefly on balance of performance. So plus 5 kilos, that does find them in the sort of same ballpark here as Ford. So it doesn't surprise us in the slightst to see how they've been able to challenge Ford for the longest time. We just see their chief in point, Jared Sebastiano, second fastest in the session behind Glob Drip by 95 thousandths of a second. So really the proof is in the pudding in the fight between Ford and Mercedes, but I would say it'd be naive to not include the factor of BMW in the mix there. Anthony Joseph behind the wheel of the number 98 How to Train Your Driver BMW, and he's up and alongside Jacob Nielsen for this round. They're third fastest by 167 thousandths. Then behind them, Tim Alexander Bleich and Catherine Lane in the number 63 SRC Motorsports Mercedes. They're fourth fastest and ahead of Isaac Paranihi, recently just up to 5th place there in the Amateurs car, the number 31 BMW. We see here Jacob McLean off to a bit of a slower start than expected. He was at the forefront of the timing charts towards the end of free practice today with 9 minutes left to go. The 73 Macca Motorsports car still reeling in for that big haymaker hit we're expecting of them today. Making their way up towards the run of it at this time here of Remus in the number 73. Snoozer 7200 asking, how does one get involved with this league? Well, we'll post the link into the AXRL Discord server, into the Twitch chat. If you're watching on YouTube, it will more likely than not be posted in towards the description of this event as well. That's subject to inquiry, of course, as all things currently stand. So let me just get the invitation for the survey here. For the gentleman in chat, there it is for you. Still watching on board at the moment with Jacob McLean. He's up the road from Richard Claffey and Andrew Walker. And I must say, it's come as quite the surprise here. We've spoken at length about how optimistic things were looking at this time for Porsche and Aston Martin, Richard Claffey and Andrew Walker. We see Walker, by looks of it there, narrowly avoiding the entry to the pit lane. Richard Claffey currently 7th. We'll see if there is an improvement to be found. The gap between the pair of them here, just under a tenth of a second. Walker across the line, sadly. Oh, there we go. It's very late delay there onto the timing chart. So he's up to the top 5. So there's the results Aston Martin's been hunting for in wet weather conditions. Now, one of the most legendary drives I think we saw for Aston Martin in the last couple of months came out of the 112 car. That was 5-star esports at the 6 hours of Silverstone over on the NLRL Console Endurance Series. That was a great showcase for what the otherwise relatively outdated V8 Vantage. In the case of the modern scope of things, Aston Martin has already released a Evo package for this car. We don't have it in this game, and this car was released in around 2018 to 2019. So going toe-to-toe with machines up in that top 5 at the moment. I mean, you're talking the you know, the BMW M4 that came about 2023, 2024, and then you've got the Ford Mustang that was mid to late 2024. This is All quite exciting stuff then for Aston Martin. And I must say as well, we're on the subject of older machines. Let's not ignore the Mercedes-AMG. This particular model was introduced in 2020, so 6 years out of date on that design now. But like the Lexus RCF, it is a case here with the AMG GT that a good design doesn't need improvement. Nonetheless, though, we see the session has massively changed in favour for that of BMW, as now taking up the helm of a 1-2 is Anthony Joseph and Isaac Paranihi, the two provisional number 31s. Now, this is the real number 31, the amateurs car of Paranihi currently behind the wheel. They make their way up out of Niki Lauda curve up through turn 2 at this time. He'll be joined by Scott Smith over the course of this round and leading that session, the provisional 31. And that's due to a glitch in the way that the game structures the joining order. If you join with a livery that has the number of, say, a car different to the one you're driving, that's what will display on the heads up. That car is actually the number 98 that we see at this time. So that's the How to Train Your Driver car. Of course, a play on words with the DreamWorks film How to Train Your Dragon. Anthony Joseph and Jacob Nielsen, fastest in the session by 0.04 of a second over Isaac Paranihi and Scott Smith for a BMW 1-2. Glob Drip then of Manuel Woodward Motorsports drops down to third place by 120 thousandths, locally by about 80 thousandths of a second to Paranihi in second. Jared Sebastiano, Manuel Woodward Motorsports number 888 car, fourth fastest ahead of Andrew Walker. With the Adeptrix Racing, they're ahead of Tim Alexander-Bleish and Catherine Lane. In 6th place, Jacob McLean 7th, Richard Claffey 8th, Grant Scar 9th, and we see Maximilian Ratinsky in 10th, Jared Peters in 11th, Joe Woodward in 12th, Shamian in 13th, Mitchell Scott in 14th for the back of the GT3 field at this time. 5.5 minutes then left to go in the session. The number 98 recently just having crossed the line. That was the leading BMW. Gap now resides at 0.04 of a second between the pair. Nearest to the line comes the number 63. Alexander Bleish and Catherine Lane, or Tim Alexander Bleish, I should say. Down to the line they go from 6th place up to 4th, so great improvement there for Mercedes. Now up and ahead of their fellow AMG, that being Jared Sebastiano in the 888 MWM car. We'll see the rebuttal coming up not far from now. We see across the line, though, Maximilian Ratinsky, the only Ferrari in this championship. Bear in mind, separate from Grant Scar and the number 86 BMW by a single thousandth of a second, but couldn't find any wiggle room over it. The 888, also same story, couldn't find the gap over the number 63, tucked in at the back of the top 5 with 4.5 minutes left to go. From behind them went the 942, the 68, and the 73. We saw the 73 there. It was pitched in to be one of the heavy hitters of this qualifying session today, still struggling to find the time. That's Jacob McLean of Macca Motorsports. That does leave some very curious questions up for debate there. The number 470 across the line a moment ago, Jared Peters from 12th on the field. And we see at this time, Mitchell Scott having recently then advanced up towards 9th place. That's the 329 car from Novasport. 9th place from what was 14th on the field. 13th or 14th there. I believe it was 14th. I think we might be actually down a car, which is concerning information. Number 98 across the line a moment ago. Still leading that session by 0.04 of a second, but the gap not really having gotten any better. We see in the Twitch chat there, one of the drivers of the former Rene Gracie racing team pitching in, saying, and I quote, "There's a few dollars in it for you if you can put the commentator's curse on the amateur's car in the number 31. I don't think we have much volition over that one, but that might be a business opportunity worth exploring in the near future. I don't know. We offer up commentary curses now. Are we dabbling in the grimoire and whatever witchcraft that may further entail from that point? Nonetheless, warmest of regards over towards the amateurs team of Paranihi and Smith, and hopefully no curses today this time around. You know, fingers crossed, so on and so forth. 470 down towards the line then, Jared Peters just behind there. That was the 97 of Glob Drip, still separate from the front row by 0.08 of a second. Peters across the line, 12th fastest, and remains there for the time being. Nearest to the line is once again the number 98, the leading BMW of Joseph and Nielsen. That always gets to be quite the confusing scope there. And for those just tuning in, as we see a whopper of a time laid in there, 1:32.997, now up by nearly half a second over Paranihi's time. Hats off there to Anthony Joseph, otherwise known as Toothless, in that number 98. That is really quite the pull through. Now, for those of you perhaps confused as to why there's two number 31s at the forefront of the field, now we had some of the head boffins over at NLRL explain this point to us earlier on last year. And what happens to be the case is when you join a session, and I believe it goes like this, if you join a session with a custom livery on your car, not the one that's being ran, in the case here of this, what I believe is a Team WRT car. I believe this was one that Augusto Farfus drove in the Intercontinental GT Series, among other drivers. But if you join with a different number, namely, has been the case here where Anthony Joseph has joined with the number 31 on his car and forgot to take it off. And it's been a case where he's joined in, and the car's the number 98, but because he's joined most recently, it shows as the number 31. Now, conversely, Paranihi and Smith are actually running the number 31. So if you're to believe anything of the following, that's the real 31, and this is the one cosplaying as the 31. We also saw in the scope between the two various states of the number 31, we do find that the gap now has been slimmed down from half a second to 2/10 between Paranihi and Joseph. Down towards the line then, into the final minute of qualifying so far, and it looks to be a BMW 1-2. Now, I had my cards riding on the line here of Mercedes and Ford being able to duke things out. We also saw recent advancement from Aston Martin, namely from the Adept Rigs team. Andrew Walker behind the wheel at this time. He'll be joined by Fisher Paykel. We saw what those two could have done back in Kyalami a few weeks ago, namely in the case of Paykel. You see there for Walker, he's had a very impressive qualifying, and I think it's been a little bit of a late burn for Aston at this time. They're separate by 0.6 of a second. Coming to the line from in front of them, the 88 and the 63. So we're going to see down towards the line in a moment's time then is Maximilian Ratinsky from 11th on the field, and then following on their trails, the 63 of Tim Alexander-Bleish and Catherine Lane. Ratinsky from 11th stays there onto the final lap of the session, just beating the bell there by 5 seconds. Tim Alexander-Bleish from 5th on the field. Let's see where the update takes him. By the looks of it, he stays in 5th place. Andrew Walker just beaten by the bell as he crosses the line, stays 4th at the end of this session. Still great hustle for Aston Martin. Things weren't looking super optimistic at the session start, but things wrapped up nice, neat and tidy to put them on the second row at the session's close. We see from behind them Joe Woodward in the 83 car. Crosses the line. Now, Joe Woodward was originally scheduled to race in the MWM car down in GT4, if memory serves correctly. This was the car pulled from the GT4 ensemble, and we've seen Woodward packed into the 83 Mustang, currently lining up at the back of the field. Taking a look into the lineup for the 83 car there with Jack Webb in that Mustang. It's not been the greatest of sessions for them. They're up by only one car here, and that's ahead of Shamian in the 555 out of their Mines BMW. Out past the back of the field at this time. The real number 31 coming to the line, Paranihi and Smith of the Amateurs BMW team. Formerly Rene Gracie Racing, down towards the line. They do bring the gap down, but just not by enough there. It was such a great hustle towards the end of the session, but only by 83 thousandths away at the session's close here in the first qualifying of the season of the Southern Summer Endurance Series here on AXRL. Are they separate from the front of the field by 83 thousandths? Nearest to the line then, the 88 Maximilian Ratinsky. We see here, heading down towards the line, Apex Matsuova Motorsports is Ratinsky, down to the line with Ferrari. From 11th on the field, needs about 2/10 and finds his way back to the top 10 triumphantly there. Up and ahead of Richard Claffey at the end of the session. Meanwhile, we saw for Tim Alexander-Bleish still at the back of the top 5, but nonetheless a great qualifying session for Mercedes AMG. Managed to get at least one of their two cars into the top 5. And what was definitely a very active second half of qualifying, namely for the GT3. So that would have been in the last 7.5 minutes if we're going to go locally here. But what a qualifying session we've had at the start there. I was not expecting BMW to pull through the way that they have in today's session. Great action at that time then from the 98 and the 31. So 2 minutes before the start of the formation lap, as you heard there, wet conditions still throughout today's race. In the opening 30 minutes, it's set to pick up and get even worse from where we stand at the moment. That's on top of 27 degrees of track temperature, 21 degrees ambient. So, as we find ourselves looking down the first grid of the season, let's go and take a look down through the order. Now, this is just from the names on the display here. This is subject to change as and when they deploy other drivers into the seat. So taking a look through here, we do find Anthony Joseph at the forefront of the action today. The number 98, How to Train Your Driver car. Fastest in the session by 83 thousandths over Isaac Perenihi in second place for a BMW 1-2 start for the first round of the championship. Lockie Banks third place ahead of Andrew Walker in fourth. Tim Alexander Bleich in fifth ahead of Jacob McLean in sixth place. Hudson Manuel in seventh ahead of Mitchell Scott in eighth. Maximilian Ratinsky turned things around at the last second of qualifying to put himself into the top 10. He starts ninth from where was previously 11th on the field. Richard Claffey rounds out the top 10 with Porsche, and he's up ahead of Grant Scott in 11th. Luke Muscat in 12th place ahead of Joe Woodward 13th, and Shamian in 14th to round out the back of the GT3 field. On to the topic of the GT4s, Liam Mutz leads the charge for Mercedes AMG in the Shanghai Shaggers number 66 car. He's up ahead of Angus Dunk with Nova Sports, ahead of Carson Close with SRC Motorsports, and Grant Schweikert in the number 469 Mango Racing BMW. A very titular GT4 field. They're going to find themselves often in the firing line of today's session, make no mistake of it, with a huge grid of GT3s backing them up here. 14 GT3s to only 4 GT4s. You do the math. Things are not looking particularly tidy for them. They're going to have quite the time here over the course of 3 hours of racing to follow in the opening round of the Southern Summer Endurance Series. So, about to start the formation lap. We're on board then with the leading 98. About to take us out onto the track then. From the looks of it, Anthony Joseph, otherwise going by Toothless on this grid today, lines up as the first of 2 drivers. Now, to remind you of the current scope of the regulations, just looking back into it, a stint timer, now this is according to their official Discord server, and this is what they published for this event. So a stint timer of 55 minutes and 2 mandatory pit stops on open strategy. Now, we saw this wreaked absolute havoc in the multi-class madness at Kyalami. So what is it liable to do in the opening race of this championship? Here at the Red Bull Ring, and I suppose now a better time than ever, as we see screeching to a halt there. A very bizarre starting strategy here for the 98. Now having to get himself up and ahead of traffic. Now we're in through Remus Corner. But I suppose now better late than never to give you a comprehensive tour, or albeit rather brief for the sake of this formation lap of the Red Bull Ring. Now, one of the key attributes we've seen from the Red Bull Ring is, of course, the huge disparity between the long open straight and the sharp corners. It's the same kind of recipe for either great racing or disaster that we've seen in other tracks in the European theatre, such as the Autodromo Nazionale di Monza. But unlike Monza, this is a much more vertical endeavour. Up over what is the effective crest of this circuit, down through Schlossgold Corner at turn 4, parabolic open hairpin right, tight on entry, loose on exit. This is what the drivers are looking for on the run through to turn 5. It looks like already permanent damage on the 98. I've been very confused about this point for some time, and it is a curious case as to how they still have panel gaps over the nose of that BMW. Down through Rauch at turn 6. This loops back in on itself when we get down towards the Wirth curve at turn 7. 2 long sweeping left-handers. This one juxtaposed by a swift right-hander to kick you out to the side at turn 8. On the run in towards turn 9 and 10, these 2 downhill right-handers. Possibly the most iconic section of the Red Bull Ring, this run down towards the line. Very easy for the back end of the car to swing away. We're still on board with the leading 98 alongside him, the 31. BMW from the front row, and then we see from behind them at this time, it's going to be Ford and Aston Martin head-to-head on that second row. Well, we'll try to keep an eye on absolutely everything we can, but do bear with us. Of course, only one set of eyes, but quite a few drivers to keep an eye on. So, making our way then down towards the line here for the first round of the championship. Not far then from the start-finish line. 3 hours of racing set to follow here in the Red Bull Ring, home of the Austrian Grand Prix and home to round 1 of the AXRL Southern Summer Endurance Series. We're back into the swing of things with endurance content with AXRL. Down towards the line then, 18 cars, 14 GT3s, 4 GT4s. Let's see how it all pans out here in Austria Without further ado then, as we go rolling down towards Niki Lauda curve, we're green and racing here in Austria, 3 hours against the clock, and the first round of the championship is officially underway. A great start from the front row, namely from that of Anthony Joseph, breaking away almost immediately from Isaac Paranihi. Side-by-side action between Globdrip and that of the Aston Martin, I should say, of Andrew Walker. Taking a look down through the field, we do see almost immediate action going to catch on board with Tim Alexander Bleich fighting already onto the podium. As we see there, Walker caught out by the sudden advancement there of Jared Sebastiano with MWM. So we see here with Alexander Bleich, a great start then in the number 63, currently eyeing up the back end of Globdrip and the number 97 MWM Ford Mustang. Then up ahead of them, Paranihi and Joseph at the forefront of this race. BMW continue to lead in 1-2. Ford take up the helm of the podium. Mercedes already up onto the second row. An ecstatic start then from GT3, as we see here. Number 63 takes up the helm of fourth place. Meanwhile, Jared Sebastiano takes up fifth over Andrew Walker. Less than ideal start for Aston Martin, but of course 3 hours of racing set to follow. Anything can and often will happen. Meanwhile, Maximilian Ratinsky moves up to 7th, up ahead of Jacob McLean. We see Mitchell Scott 9th at the moment. That's forced down quite some way as the data updates we see there. Oh my goodness, he's all the way out past the GT4. Something seriously untoward had to have happened. We can see same story applies for Richard Claffey, caught in the middle of the GT4 pack. Meanwhile, in the topic of GT4s, an ecstatic start by Angus Dunk and Nova Sport. Now, that was to be expected, really. Chevrolet, unparalleled acceleration off the line, so immediately caught out the number 66 of Mutz, and much in the same case as we've seen there for Aston Martin's Andrew Walker up against the 2 Mercedes cars of Sebastiano and Bleich. It is a case where he's got plenty of time to make up for the losses in the early doors of this race. We see going on currently for the fight of 6th place, and Andrew Walker to go toe-to-toe with both Ratinsky and McLean in the 88 and the 73. That's with Apex Matsiova, and by the looks of it there, Maka Motorsports already side-by-side with the Ferrari of Ratinsky. McLean at the inside, down at turn 3. Could there be an opportunity for a switchback? Yes, absolutely. As we see there from Maximilian Ratinsky, gets his elbows out early doors here in the opening 3 minutes of racing. The case he finds himself in, though, that 296 lacks the straight line speed to keep the Mustang up at his side, so he's going to either have to try and aim for something a bit dangerous down towards Schlossgold. As we see already, fate would have it differently, and he tucks back in behind the number 73. Meanwhile, nearby fights here, Jared Peters hunting down Joe Woodward at the back of the top 10. Also to be considered as well if there is the rebuttal between Ratinsky and McLean at this time. Alfa Rauch, BMW versus Ford at the back of the top 10. We see Shamian tucking in from behind them. Dunk having broken away here as we see being approached by the rest of GT3. We saw there, that's Mitchell Scott just getting up and around. Bear in mind, these two on the same team, if memory serves correctly. The 328 and the 329. Those are both Nova Sport cars across both categories, and that's accidentally put a bit of a halt on his lead. Angus Dunk now falling in behind Mitchell Scott, and that has created a bit of a closing margin there for the advance of the Mercedes behind him. Liam Mutz now has his chance to return to the lead of this race after a less than ideal start with Mercedes. Meanwhile, up front, Paranihi is closing ground over Joseph. The same story could be applied there to Drip over Paranihi. Looks like we very well could be in the chances here of a three-way split for the race lead in the opening hour. First pit stop coming up then will be in and around the 2 hours 5 minutes mark. We have a 55-minute stint limit as according to the official server information. Behind them, we see that continued fight at the back of the top 5. Andrew Walker with Adept Rigs Racing fighting with Jared Sebastiano of Manuel Woodward Motorsports. Meanwhile, in the fight between Apex Matsiova and Maka Motorsports is Maximilian Ratinsky and Jacob McLean. That sorted itself out very, very quickly in that current scope of the fight for 7th. Now we see more relevantly here, McLean is starting to close ground over Walker, so there is that chance. There's much as we've seen the potential for a three-way split at the forefront of this race. We could see the same story apply at the back of the top 5 at the moment, being heralded by the arrival of the Triple Eight. Tim Alexander Bleich and Catherine Lane do find themselves stranded in the midst of it all, though. They're still growing time away from Jared Sebastiano, their fellow AMG up in GT3 at this time. We have seen to be a little bit of a falter there in that last lap, the gap having gotten significantly closer than expected between the pair. So there is the chances for them to be caught for 4th place, but as we saw for the great majority of that opening 5 minutes, it was a case that they were able to carve that distance away, and it's likely so given their pace. We've seen what Tim Alexander-Bleich can do. We've still yet to see anything on our radars of what Catherine Lane's capable of. They were supposed to make a entry into the console endurance series in season 2. At least they were on the initial entry list, and then suddenly SRC withdrew before the first round at Zolder, and then when questioned on it, at least from our informants, denied ever having entered. So a very curious case of this ghost car then having re-emerged here in the Australian theatre at the Southern Summer Endurance Series. Nonetheless, Tim Alexander-Bleich making good ground. Behind him then, we can see that advance imminently arriving, the 888 of Jared Sebastiano. Andrew Walker, I've got to point this out as well. You can start to see the Aston Martin is picking up now from where it left off. It's not the greatest car off of the start, but once you get the ball rolling here, it is very, very hard to slow it down. Once it's in motion, this car just continues to gain and gain and gain on momentum. That's going to be a real thorn in the side for Mercedes. As you can see, currently taking up the helm of both 4th and 5th, spanning that 2nd and 3rd row of the grid. So you see here for Alexander-Bleich, still being intercepted by Jared Sebastiano. We see here from Andrew Walker's point of view with Adeptrix Racing. Just caught him behind the pair, and he's got present company over his rear. You can see there, hanging in the mist, generated from the number 942. You see there the 73 of Jacob McLean with Macca Motorsports. Now, taking a look further behind them just to see a battle going on between the 470 and that of Joe Woodward in the 83. We see here very close fighting for the last of those top 10 positions. You see here for Jared Peters, the 470, making his way up towards turn, at the current time of things, turn 3. Now, I am just trying to check my notes just very quickly here, because if I'm not mistaken, yes, so this is the Kiss Army racing car. Now, they were originally scheduled to enter, much as we saw for the How to Train Your Driver car, they were scheduled with a different manufacturer up until the last 24 hours. They were set to join with Ferrari on our last notes patch there, and now they've joined BMW. So a curious case here for Jared Peters and Luke Muscat, currently 10th place, having broken away from the line of Woodward, and now Shamian intercepting Woodward for a fight of 11th place. We see there with Shamian, right behind him Richard Claffey with RTC Racing. Now, to observe as well, there was an incident a little bit further down the line. You can see it caught up there, the amateurs car, the number 31, Isaac Paranihi and Scott Smith, into trouble in that second sector. They've now dropped down to 7th place, and that's created quite the sizable ripple effect on the field. It's put Glob Drip up to 2nd place in the 97 MWM car. Tim Alexander-Bleich with SRC Motorsports moves into 3rd place. Jared Sebastiano to 4th. And there we see Andrew Walker with Adeptrix back up into the top 5. Jacob McLean to 6th. So not the greatest start here in the opening 10 minutes for Paranihi, but I suppose get the errors out of the way whilst you have the opportunity. 2 hours, 51 minutes still left to go before the checkered flag. Any and all opportunities are still on the table to recuperate from these losses. Evidently, I think we've got someone who is either on the team or is formerly part of the team hate watching in the Twitch chat. Yeah, to each their own, to each their own. Evidently quite entertained by what happened to Paranihi. We're not. We were hoping for a decent race up the front there between the two BMWs, but oh well. He's got the opportunity now to make up the time since. So, nearest fights going on at the moment. We see here Shamian v Claffey. RTC Racing going head-to-head here towards the back of the top 12 positions as it stands here on the 6th row, looking up the inside, the Porsche of Claffey. Looking at his chances here in that ongoing fight for 12th place on the field against Shamian in the out of their minds 555 car. Down towards Rauch, he's around the outside, later onto the brakes. A great move by Claffey, leveraging some of the stronger attributes there of the Porsche 992. Now, we've also seen there to be an issue for Maximilian Ratinsky. We see off in the foreground is the what appears on the radars there as the 555. So it's not Ratinsky, but it is Shamian. The 329 and, for that matter, the 555 both caught up in a spot above her. And now we see the grid drop down a car already. We're down to 13 vehicles in GT3. We started at 14 cars. And I believe that was, yes, it was Ratinsky who's left. The Ferrari now separate from this grid. Now, we saw there to be some slight connection issues for Apex Matsiova Motorsports earlier on in today's session, so I would not be awfully surprised to see them rejoin in the next couple of minutes, having already proven that there was a disconnect going on there as well. You see here Jared Sebastiano getting closer and closer to his chances for a fight on the podium against Tim Alexander Bleish. That'll be one to observe in the near future. We see Isaac Paranihi now up past Jacob McLean to 6th place on the field. So very quick pickup there by the number 31, the Amateurs Racing BMW. Paranihi, and at this time, looking at their lineup, I believe it was Scott Smith behind the wheel as well. So you see here the number 31. So we'll be catching on board then with that progressing fight on the podium. It's going to be a curious one to observe firsthand, going to catch on board then with the two Mercedes cars up over that second row. On with the attacking of two then. Jared Sebastiano in the number 888. He and Hudson Manuel got the world's weight upon their shoulders to perform here. They're sizing up their chances of what could very well be, in the next 2 hours and 48 minutes, be two MWM cars on the podium in GT3, sizing up his chances already over SRC. This is in the fight for third. You see as well, this was maybe one aspect we didn't consider upon the race start, is just the tremendous amount of spray generated in these conditions. Now, of course, as we mentioned earlier, 30 minutes coming up from now, or from the race start, so currently we're coming up to the halfway mark of it. The weather is set to still pick up. You can see it just off in the horizon there, over the rolling hills outside of Spielberg, Austria. You can see those thick clouds of rain looming in the distance here. So for the drivers, this is a bit of a dreadful sight, knowing that the worst is still yet to come weather-wise. So if they're struggling in the wet conditions now, it is only getting worse from here on out. We've seen biblically wet conditions in the past, make no mistake of it, and we've seen drivers either completely buckle or flourish under said conditions, and I think that is going to create a very interesting study in the grid today. We see a big step out there for Tim Alexander Bleish. Crisis averted, but it has brought in the new threat of the fight of third place. He very nearly saw the barriers head on in the 63. Now he must fend off third place from Jared Sebastiano. Down towards Red Bull Mobile Corner, turn 10. Bear in mind, really not too far off the trails of these two Mercedes cars. Hanging in their trails at this time by half a second is Andrew Walker with Adept Rigs Racing Aston Martin. In that last lap was faster than either of them by the closest margin of half a second. So this is staggeringly quick pace here. We may very well have to catch on board with the Aston Martin in a moment's time, as he's got front row tickets to what could be an all-out brawl on the podium here in GT3. On board then with Adept Rigs Racing Aston Martin. This time on board with Andrew Walker. You can see he's looking his way up the inside on Jared Sebastiano. Now, I wouldn't go super early for a move like that. But what he's trying to do is get inside Sebastiano's head. He's trying to let him know. And this is something we've repeated so many times, but I feel like it's almost become a bit of a catchphrase here. But it's a case where you keep leaving the gap open, I'm taking it. Evidently, he can't get too cocky. Nearly ran himself aground in the 942. Nonetheless, he is very much part of that fight in the top 5 at this time. We had yellow flags out, and it is for the 328 car. That's for Angus Dunk in the Nova Sports Chevrolet, now taking up the helm of the lead by looks of it here. Just taking a look down the order is the 56. Carson Claus leads at this time. Claus and Tolby with SRC Motorsports leading GT4. Meanwhile, we're watching SRC Motorsports fend off 2 cars here for control of the last of those podium positions up in GT3. Back in the green flag conditions. A very hectic quarter hour of racing already under our belts here in the opening race of the Southern Summer Endurance Series here on AXRL, and we can almost barely see the scope of the fight on the podium from the point of view of the Aston Martin. So we'll have to tuck back in with the view of things from Jared Sebastiano's point of view, though albeit not much better in terms of visibility. We see they're squeezed through at Niki Lauda curve. That is the lapped number 469, the Mango Racing BMW of Grant Schweikert, I should say. As we see in the background here, side-by-side action with the Aston Martin of Andrew Walker being intercepted by Isaac Paranihi in the number 31. He's been a silent predator of the grid since his setback to 7th. He's climbed his way back to the top 5. You can see right up over his nose is the podium. So he is not too far away from redemption within the first hour of racing in this championship. We see here the continued fight of 3rd place. Now, we daren't look away for but a moment here between these two. 888 versus 63. SRZ versus MWM. This is for 3rd place. You see looming behind them the amateurs number 31 and the Adept Rigs number 942. Bear in mind, this section of the track is where Alexander Bleich has had issues before. Not this time around, so it seems, on the exit of turn 8. Now, this could seriously kick off between these two. I've got it in great minds to think that it is going to be very much so brazen side-by-side fighting in the next couple of laps if the momentum from the 888 is to be believed at this time. Let's not rule out, though, the elephant in the room, and that's the 31. The 888 catches a huge wad of standing water. Yellow flags out. Here in Sector 3 to Sector 1, sudden turn of events there. Taking a look from the point of view of the Manuel Woodward Motorsports Mercedes. So you see catching a huge chunk of standing water there in the runoffs at turn 10. Turns himself around nearly to meet the pit wall. And that has not gone well. Now on board with Tim Alexander Bleich, we're clear of yellow flag conditions. In the background was what looked to be some semblance of fight back from Andrew Walker with Adept Rigs Racing. But as we see here, Isaac Paranihi takes up the helm of what is now 4th on the field. Tim Alexander Bleich and Catherine Lane given just a bit of breathing space here over the two behind them, as it looks like Aston Martin still getting their elbows out to fend off a chance with BMW. The Amateurs Racing number 31 car now up in 4th. Well, what a sudden turn of events that's proven to be. Meanwhile, up front, the number 98 How to Train Your Driver car still at the forefront of this race. Anthony Joseph leading that charge by quite the distance now. About 6 seconds over Globdrip. Globdrip, if I can get the name out. My word. Globdrip and Lockie Banks in the 97 car, 2nd place in this race so far. So let's go and catch on board. We see here with... momentarily with Globdrip. We see here with Andrew Walker. This is who we want to catch on board with. This could be in that provisional fight for 4th place. Now, there is also some fighting going on behind, we see at this time. On a few different occasions here, the 888 still fighting down the line. This is with Richard Claffey for 8th place. We are looking right now, though, at the fight of 4th. Isaac Paranihi versus Andrew Walker in GT3. A very mixed bag start then across both categories. Drama for Novasport as now they're usurped of the race lead after an incident for Angus Dunk. It is now Carson Clausen. Looking here, Stephen Tolby leading that charge for SRC down in GT4. Now, this might be... Now, I'm not going to hold my breath to it because I'm pretty sure the vote still had it in stalemate last we checked. But this could be the first and only time this season we see the GT4s. Now, I'm praying for GT4 to continue to have a presence on this field. They're a fantastic category of vehicles. As we've seen so far, things have been rather entertaining for them over the course of that qualifying session. The race has been definitely a little bit more spread out than GT3, but I think that's just by proxy of having less cars available in circulation. Where we started with 14, we're now down to 13 cars, minus Maximilian Ratinsky and Apex Matsiova. With Ferrari, we still have 13 cars on the grid, nonetheless, on GT3 alone. We see off wide there was, I believe, that was, yes, Jacob McLean down at Rauch at turn 6 on the run in towards Worth Curve at turn 7. Just a distant observer of that top 5 fight as we see the gaps start to open up rather drastically here between Walker and Paranihi. Paranihi now setting his sights upon Tim Alexander Bleich. So far, so good for SRC. They've got 2 cars in podium steads, one of which leading in category, the other one on the podium for GT3. So not a shabby start by any stretch of the imagination, especially considering as well, looking into their lineup, if I'm not mistaken, they were scheduled to enter, I believe it was another car on top, but that has had to pull out. That's been a bit of a running case here for quite a few of the larger teams of this grid. SRC probably being among the largest in GT3's grid. Now, of course, locally, they've got out of their minds, which also encompasses currently that leading car that's part of the OTM family, that being the How to Train Your Driver car, the 98 at the forefront of the race today, of Anthony Joseph behind the wheel. You also have Manuel Woodward Motorsports, still a very young team. They emerged in sort of the last half a year nearabouts. I think they're actually coming up to nearly a full year in operation, but they are still quite a new team on the field. Joe Woodward and Hudson Manuel, the two creative minds behind that project, if I'm not mistaken. So it was a brand new venture, and they've become one of the largest grids locally here on the AXRL grid. So it's been very curious to see how they've gone up against other not only teams on the local scale such as OTM, but also going up against on the international scale with SRC Motorsports. Nova Sport as well. It would be naive not to consider them as part of that fight. Now we just take a look here. That's one of the Nova Sports cars being overtaken by Andrew Walker, and that's Angus Dunk at this time. Nova Sport, of course, we've had quite good collaboration with this team over the last couple of years, working with the folks at AXRL when we took up the helm of covering a few of the seasons of AXRL on a number of occasions, namely at the COTA and Bathurst rounds. They were able to give us really valuable information from a driver's eye view. We were able to get comprehensive breakdowns of the track on video from the folks at Nova Sport. I do believe there was a bit of a stutter there for connection for the 328. No current warnings over whether or not they might disconnect. I think that was just a little blip, and with every reason to expect it. Now, from what I was told by the folks operating this event, they're running on an American server. Now, their thought process behind that one was the case that since we have drivers connecting from both Europe and Australia, it's easier to meet them halfway. So, yeah, albeit both sides are going to struggle a little bit under these conditions. I think we see for some drivers here, Carson Claus, a Canadian talent, is not struggling whatsoever. He's actually got the best ping of any one driver on this grid. So he's golden. He's not got any worries. And that's probably one of the aiding factors on top of great pace here and good survival skills in that 56 SRC Chevrolet up until Schlossgold Corner just now that has kept him in the forefront of this race. Nearby fight here, Peters v Woodward. Kiss Army Racing paying tribute to Kiss Army CV8, legendary member of this community. His legacy lives on with this team here, side by side with Joe Woodward. You've got to hand it here to Woodward to be within that fight of the top 10, and bear in mind, was not originally scheduled to race in GT3. This has had to be quite a sudden rejig of assets over at MWM to put him back in the seat on GT3 with minimal preparation and hop back in on the grid and still fight within the top 10. That is respectable indeed, given those kind of situations, those circumstances at play as they make their way around turns 7 and 8. A bit of a loftier run of things there for Jared Peters. That could open up opportunities here for Joe Woodward. This is in the fight of 10th place as we head down through Rint Corner. Held around the outside there. Good defense by Jared Peters. Now, I want to get on board quite quickly here with the current subject at hand, the fight upon the podium. Now, taking a look in here, I think we are about to see the makings of a switchback, and we sadly only catch the second half of it with Isaac Paranihi, but nonetheless up to third place goes the number 31 on the revenge drive now. Bear in mind, comprised that 1-2 start for BMW. Now only one obstacle remains in their way, that being Glob Drip in the 97 MWM Mustang up in second place. So not too shabby at all here for Smith and Paranihi. Of course, we've seen them on a multitude of occasions in a few different teams here on AXRL, across quite a few different seasons as well, had I any mind about it. So no doubts to their ability on this grid. It is worth observing, though, that outside of these few select fights that we've seen in the last couple of minutes here, the grid has definitely started to disperse quite quickly, and that is often what happens with wet weather conditions, no matter the circuit. I mean, we could have the best of circuits for all of these drivers here, and even in the pouring wet rain, there's very few chances that grid stays together for longer than about 30 minutes, and that's what we're seeing right now here in the opening half hour of round one of the championship. Is the grid already start to split up by some way, drivers tucking in to their own sort of flow of things, their own rhythm, and that's what is ultimately going to decide positions in this race. It is a consistency game in wet weather racing. Already the GT4s have on multiple occasions encountered their larger brothers at GT3. So you see there, Glob Drip getting up and around Liam Mutz in the 66 car. As for nearest fights, though, I think we are starting to run out of options, really. There is that worthy consideration at this time of Adept Rigs Racing's Andrew Walker versus Tim Alexander Bleich. But as we see, they're actually running a little bit wide through Schlossgold. That could reinforce the hopes here. And you can see why that happens, to be very narrow dry line down at Schlossgold at turn 4. Currently on board with the Aston Martin of Adeptrix Racing. Andrew Walker and Fisher Paykel. You can definitely see where a lot of the issues are starting to arise from. Of course, we saw it at Schlossgold, and we're seeing it here through the Worth curve. That huge wad of standing water where the track goes very glossy is where there's just all water skirted across the track, and that is going to make for a very hard time trying to find any kind of grip on these wet weather tyres. So the drivers are having to stick religiously to that dry line now. That's going to be the status quo for nearly 2.5 hours between now and the checkered flag at the end of the first round. Future fights to be considered. Grant Scar versus Jared Sebastiano. That's for 7th at this time. They're separate right now by about 7 seconds in the last interval. So you see here 1.4 seconds, the dividing factor between Mercedes and Aston Martin at the back of the top 5. Bear in mind, 55-minute stint limit. Now that is, I think, deliberately designed to catch drivers out towards the end of this race. And we'll be seeing those first pit stops come up in doing the rough maths here in about 30... No, not even that, actually. We're talking in the ballpark here. Probably about 28 minutes. So we're really not too far out from it. About 5 minutes left to go in the hour is when we'll start to see them. At the very latest, I imagine we could see even earlier attempts of it so that they can have a bit more of a chunk at the end of the race. As bear in mind, there is going to be that huge crunch in the 3rd hour. That's going to be a sort of running theme here over the course of this series. It does follow a lot of the same rules that were brought in a few weeks ago at the Multi-Class Madness at Kyalami, of which we covered here on TRTN. So you see there, in the foreground, flashing from Alexander Bleich, catching on board here with the SRC Mercedes as he's encountering traffic up over his nose, and it's their little brother then, the AMG GT4 of Liam Mutz. And it was a common misconception we had as far back as the VSR days, actually, about this car, the AMG GT3. We had it in our minds that, like the Aston Martin V8 Vantage that shares an AMG engine, that it was also using the 4-litre twin-turbo found down in its little brother, the AMG GT4. No, that is not the case. It inherits the 6.3-litre unit from the SLS program. Now, in my mind, the SLS is still the prettiest Mercedes ever constructed by a long shot, and I don't think it's even close in some regards. You could definitely make the argument, you know, 300 SEL Gullwing, 600 Grosser. I mean, I would even go ahead and throw in maybe the SLR McLaren 722, the Sterling Moss perhaps as well. But you can't beat the SLS. And, well, yes, the AMG GT is definitely a worthy successor on the track. I think some of that mystique was lost when we lost the SLS out of the lineup at Mercedes. Obviously, it's always been a case onwards and upwards, and Mercedes is actively developing a replacement to this model now. We spoke of it in the last couple of months, that development is already quite swiftly underway for Mercedes to replace the current generation AMG GT with a new model coming up hopefully later on this year. Now, that follows on other trends in GT3, as we saw Lexus and Toyota have been hard at work on the GR-GT program, and its subsequent GT3 follow-up that is set to replace the very, very sturdy feature of the grid, the Lexus RCF. And it is going to be a real crying shame to see that car go after the career that it's had. One of the longest existing designs of any one specific vehicle in GT3. And now we're not going to throw Porsche in the mix, because technically you can bring that design as far back as the Volkswagen Beetle. We're talking about one specific generation of model. The Lexus RTF has stood the test of time for 13 years, nearabouts. It actually might be a little less than that. It was, some rumors had it 2013, some rumors had it 2015. So anywhere between 11 and 13 years that RCF has been on the grid. As for this AMG, we're seeing here now very quickly being intercepted by its cousin, the Aston Martin V8 Vantage. That's 0.6 of a second for Tim Alexander Bleich. We'll get back on board with Andrew Walker. This thing's looking to pick up now in what is the fight of 4th place as we get towards the first 30 minutes of racing covered here in round 1. Already in the pit lane then, the number 83 car on this grid so far. And that's one of the, I believe, one of the GT3s at this time. The 83 in the pit lane at this time. We see running out wide through Rauch. You see they're having to wrestle the car back into form, the Aston Martin of Andrew Walker. You can see the wet weather as prophesized in the opening 30 minutes. You can see the spray has gotten even more dramatic there from the AMG. It's almost impossible to make out the exact edges of that car. So that's going to be a big issue when they get closer and closer, because that's been the current trend so far for these two in the last couple of laps here. That Mercedes has started losing ground over the Aston. See there, that is an area of the track definitely to watch out for. Now, cutting back to the last replay, I believe we still have it on record here. This is what happened earlier on in the race for the Triple Eight of Jared Sebastiano. You go too far out of this section here, and that's when you catch a huge puddle there of standing water. The car kicks out wide. He's fortunate to have not hit the wall, and the same story therein applies for the 942. So 0.8 of a second dividing these two, and we'll take a look at the wider grid after the first 30 minutes of racing. And at this time, How to Train Your Driver leads the race then, with Anthony Joseph behind the wheel of the 98 car. Glob Drip in second with Manuel Woodward Motorsports, and Isaac Paranihi up to third on the revenge drive from 7th with the amateurs racing BMW. Tim Alexander Bleish of SRC Motorsports still fending off an attack here from Andrew Walker of Adept Rigs Racing. They're at the back of the top 5, 4th and 5th for Mercedes AMG and Aston Martin. Jacob McLean in 6th with Mako Motorsports up ahead of Grant Scott in 7th with BMW. Jared Sebastiano down to 8th. Of course, we saw from that incident earlier on at turn 10 at Red Bull Mobile Corner, but is making up ground over Scar. There could be their fight for 7th place coming up not too far from now. Richard Claffey of RTC Racing in 9th place. As I say this, we see into the pit lanes goes Glob Drip with Manuel Woodward Motorsports. Now, it's a curious sign here indeed, as we see potentially here any other drivers into the pit lane at this time. Very early strategy. Now, of course, with 55 minutes of maximum stint time, not mandatory stint time. That's something that needs to be laid on the table here. That is not the same term. It is not a mandatory stint time. You have to do 55 minutes a time every single time. That is the most amount of time one can hope to do before any penalties sweep in. So into the pits goes Drip. We also see, just having come in now, the Triple Eight of Jared Sebastiano. We saw in the pit lane for some time, and it looks to be a little bit of a longer stay than expected, is that of Joe Woodward. That was 3 MWM cars all in the pit lane at one point there for just a moment. That does bring Paranihi up to 2nd place. Now, on the topic of Glob Drip, whatever they did over that first mandatory pit stop evidently did not count, because I think now, as part of that open strategy, what constitutes a mandatory pit stop is a driver swap. So in the case of the 97 car, it's now re-emerged onto the field after resetting their stint timer, because that's effectively all they've done from running through the pit lane like that. We saw that to be a case quite some time ago. To be a case where we found out rolling through the pits would just reset the stint timer and you could go about your business. So in the case of the 97 car, he's still yet to swap over to Lockie Banks. That'll be something coming up potentially in the next hour as we head into the sort of hour and a half mark in towards the session midway, is when we could expect to see the first actual mandatory pit stop creep in for these two. Of course, that would explain why they've actually had a minimal position loss from 2nd down to 7th here, and considering how close the grid is still to each other. That would have stood to be up outside of the top 10 if he had actually come in for a full driver swap. That can range in the ballpark of about 20-odd seconds. We saw that to be the case for Liam Mutz, who's gone in and took his mandatory pit stop. Now, it's a curious case here. Because he's the only driver in that car, any pit stop counts as mandatory for him. Of course, there's no mandate on tyres, no mandate on fuel. If he comes to a stop in his pits and then comes back out, no matter what he does between start and finish, it counts as mandatory because he's the only one behind the wheel. So, quickly tabbing back in over this fight between Walker and Bleish. Latest update has it put at 2.4 seconds between Mercedes and Aston Martin at this time. Neither of which having yet considered options for an early pit lane stop. The 83 still in the pit lane, then Joe Woodward. No current information as to whether or not we'll see them back out on track in this race. But it's a long stay in the pits there for the 83 Mustang. We do see very close fighting here. Mitchell Scott and Jared Sebastiano. This is for 10th on the field. Very close action between the pair. A great switch back to boot from the 888. Out through Remus corner. Textbook example there. They're selling him the dummy and then they're selling him the whole circus. That was something there from the 888. We see having rejoined the field is Shamian. Now, we saw there was issues with the car dropping out of circulation, and now we've seen who it is. It's the 555 out of their Mines car, the BMW of Shamian, joined by Miles Johnston in this round, neither of which having yet to have completed a mandatory pit stop. But as we saw, obviously, the reasoning behind that was pretty clear in the making. We've seen now most recently up to 6th place over Jacob McLean goes Glob Drip, having left the pits not long ago in today's session. In the topic of that fight for what is currently 3rd on the field then, between Bleich and Walker, still really no wiggle room to be found. 2.5 seconds between Mercedes and Aston towards the back of that 2nd row. So, getting back on board then with a few of the drivers from around the field here. We do see that that gap is hitting a bit of an ebb and flow state here, a stalemate as it finds itself. In that middle sector is where the Aston Martin's gaining time, but it's losing time in the 3rd, so it nullifies itself by the end of each lap. 2.5 seconds currently between Walker and Bleich. We'll catch on with them a little later on. We see here on the revenge drive. It's a story of one of 2 cars to be on revenge drives today. First was the number 31 Amateurs Racing BMW. Now it's the 888 MWM Mercedes of Jared Sebastiano. We see in the pits then still is the 55 and the 83. So nothing really to report much on there. I believe it was a disconnect for the 555 car. Now, that is, of course, some of the trade-offs that come with the way that this series has been set up. Running, of course, as mentioned before, out of an American server means that we are in somewhat of an area of compromise. Both sides, both major parties, as it could be suggested, of this championship, the European offerings and the Oceanian offerings, neither of them are going to be finding direct advantage. No one driver is going to have, or at least was on paper at least, the suggestion that no one driver was going to have a disproportionately low ping over each other. Now, that's kind of fallen apart with the ace in the hole over at the number 56 car. If we can go to locate the Chevrolet here of Carson Claus and Stephen Tolby. Now, they lucked out, SRC Motorsports, when they signed Carson Claus, because as it turns out, when you run on a North American server, putting a North American driver in the car is the ace in the hole. That's the solution to be located at this time. The 56 now having slotted in behind the 328 of Angus Dunk. Curious to have found out what's happened in the case there up at the forefront of GT4. 5 seconds between the 2 Chevrolets. You see here, we'll stay on board with the 56 for the time being. We'll be back in a moment's time. We see the 469 having come into the pits. That's Mango Racing's Grant Schweikart in the number 469. We'll be back in a moment. As we're still on board here with the SRC Motorsports number 56, they were intercepted by their teammates at the number 63, and now the Chevrolet finds itself caught between the battle of what could very well be third place. We see the Aston Martin behind them, quickly to intercept them there, Andrew Walker of AXRL Racing, as the Chevy moves over to the right-hand side on the run down towards Niki Lauda curve. As of currently, their division second, momentarily stood in the way, unintentionally so, of that ongoing fight. Long-winded as it is right now, what is currently third on the field. In the meantime, then, we saw that Drip has made even more ground up, this time over Grant Scar. We saw, of course, that they had already made ground over McLean. Now Scar under their belt, back into the top 5. At the moment, the BMW 1-2 that started this race off, coming up on what is nearly 3/4 of an hour ago. So time really has flown here, in spite of all things. Has now returned once more. In the pit lane at the moment, Mitchell Scott with Nova Sport. Quite a big fan of those colours there. Can't seem to place a finger on where it reminds me of anything specifically, but very compelling colour scheme. Complementary colours. It's a thing in colour theory, I'm pretty sure. It's I mean, no, that would be yellow, wouldn't it? It would be, if we're talking complementary colours, it would be yellow and purple, not green and purple. But nonetheless, very pretty. Very, very pretty indeed. So I'm told as well from the 888, this was information they willingly divulged publicly. So not necessarily to us specifically, but this is supposed to be based off of the Mercedes Vodafone car from 2015. I can see it. I can definitely see it. My mind immediately drifts less to GT3 and more over to the Mercedes McLaren Vodafone car of the Formula 1 era, mid-2000s, late 2000s. I'd arguably say that's McLaren's best livery since the Marlboro livery of the 1990s has been the McLaren Vodafone era, the chrome car. I know they sort of tongue-in-cheek referenced it in the last couple of years in their time at Silverstone. In the current day, of course, owing to their partnership with Google and Chrome, it was their best opportunity to bring back a Chrome livery, and they brought it back for the British Grand Prix. I still think we need to go back. We need to go back to the Vodafone one. It was such a brilliant livery in its time. Now, me personally, I'm still a bit more biased over towards Renault Sport as one of the best liveries of the 2000s, but you know, that's neither here nor there. And that's a conversation for a completely different time. Or maybe for the next hour. Widely depends on where this race goes at this time. We could get into the conversation of some other things motorsports-wise to sort of fill in the time here with the drivers strategizing and really getting down to the nitty-gritty of things, trying to effectively survive that opening hour. We see that Carson Claus and Stephen Tolby are into the pit lane here. We'll see if there is a driver swap coming up for these two. We do see that the first mandatory marker has been cleared from 2 now down to 1. So we'll wait to see here from confirmation as they exit the pit lane. But I am liable to believe that Tolby is now behind the wheel. We've yet to see from those LED markers, a little too far away for us to read at this time. But out onto the track, we'll wait for the update then. Rejoining the field, the 56. But who might be behind the wheel? This could also prove the theory correct that it is a driver swap for the 2 car entries that are required. No, so it's still close behind the wheel. So now that does raise the question, is it just coming to a stop that is what demands a mandatory pit stop? And just rolling straight through only resets the stint timer? Many such things to consider. In the pit lane then, once again, and definitely in much worse wear than we last saw them, that's Mitchell Scott with Nova Sport. Meanwhile, in the topic of the fight between Mercedes and Aston Martin, now up at 3.1 seconds, where we would have expected as the rain continued to beat down on track here, that the Aston would have gained some kind of advantage. It seems to have been the opposite here. AXRL Racing settling into a pattern from 4th place so far. As we see, severe damage for Jacob McLean's car. Number 73, possibly the latest victim of this sudden spurt of super heavy rain. As we see now in the last sort of 15 minutes of the opening hour, just how dire it is. It's almost to the case where even on the external cameras here, we're struggling to make out the image of these cars in some areas of the track. We see here on the AXRL, the chase here between Scar and McLean, the 86 against the 73 on the run down through to Worth Curve at turn 7. Into the pit lane, then goes Grant Scar. Now, if I'm to believe as well, taking a look there, that is, if I'm not mistaken, the Roadblock racing car. Yeah, so Grant Scar, and it was announced this morning as well that joining him on that team would be Jason Leatherby. Now, last time we saw Leatherby, if I'm not mistaken, was Season 2 of SRC, back in the AM division. I'm pretty sure I've said this before, so I'm liable to believe that we've actually seen Leatherby even more recently, and I would have probably made the call then that we saw him at maybe the Multi-Class Madness in Kyle Army. Well, he's one of several drivers into the pit lane then, Grant Scar. So too is Andrew Walker with Adeptrix Racing. We see Jared Peters in the Kiss Army racing car. Into the pit lane we go. We see on what has now been cleared as their final pit stop, but still yet to have been released from the pit box here, Mitchell Scott in the 329. Walker on his way out. We'll see if there has been a driver swap here for the Adeptrix Racing team. Is it the case that Fisher Paykel is behind the wheel now of that 942 on their way out? Also having emerged from behind them, Grant Scar in the 86. Jared Peters not far to follow them. Yes, Fisher Paykel behind the wheel. So now we get to see their first time back again since the Multi-Class Madness in Kyle Army. Now behind the wheel of the Aston Martin. And they run down towards Schlossgold at turn 4. And we do see there, speaking of Jason Leatherby, he's behind the wheel of the number 86 Roadblock racing car. Tucked in at the moment behind the AMG of Liam Mutz. As for Jared Peters, has he swapped over in the Roadblock car? Not the Roadblock car, sorry, the Kiss Army car. At this time, doesn't appear to be the case that he swapped over to Luke Muscat. It would have updated by... No, there we go. As I say that. What great timing that's proven to be. Luke Muscat behind the wheel of the 470. Nearly said the 420 there. 470. So now one does question, what is the strategy here for the stranded AMG? Separate from Globdrip by 15.3 seconds, separate from Paranihi by 14.5. Tim Alexander Bleish has braved harsh conditions in this opening stint here, not long to pass over potentially to his teammate Catherine Lane. So what is really going to happen here for the 63 on this lap? Could we be seeing them into the pit lane? Out through turn 9 we go. Normally, you'd see a bit more of a commitment to hug the inside, so it definitely does seem to be the case that as we round turn 10, he'll be staying out for at least one more lap. Bear in mind, the cut-off point here for Bleish is going to be, in this stint at least, about 7 minutes from now, before he has to come into the pits to reset that stint timer. We see for the 555 car, Miles Johnston is now behind the wheel, so... As we do see here for BMW up in GT3, out of their minds, is back onto the field. Admittedly, quite a few laps down here, and currently playing second fiddle to the back of the GT4 field. Nearest to them for position is at this time the stranded 329 Nova Sport car of Mitchell Scott, and then after them is going to be Grant Schweikert with Mango Racing BMW. See at the moment, Carson Claus behind Liam Mutz, Angus Dunk. Yet to have taken a mandatory pit stop, so it seems, in the 328. Leads the charge for GT4. Now, that is subject, really, to whether or not they come into the pits now or in about, as we mentioned before, 6 minutes' time. To then allow the 66 back up into the lead of division. Also does raise the question here. That opening stint has been a formidable one so far for how to train your driver, and neither the leading BMWs have yet considered their odds to come into the pit lane. Paranihi at this time still out on track as they cross the line. Bear in mind, cut-off point coming up in about 5 minutes for these two. They will have to come into the pits within the first 55 minutes of the race as per the maximum stint limit. So it looks like they're playing this one out for the long game. And in the case of Paranihi, it definitely has worked quite favourably for him at this time. We'll see, though, after that first run into the pits, exactly where it is he lies on the track as he leaves for the first of 2 times, potentially first of 3 times, actually, as things stand by the end of this race. Next on board then, the 93, Richard Claffey. I've got to say, it's been a great race so far for Porsche. They've been slowly chipping away at the rest of the field. They've been pretty solid for pace here. And as mentioned, you know, when we were in that conversation earlier about the best wet racing manufacturers, we mentioned Aston Martin and we also mentioned Porsche. And where we made reference in the case of Aston Martin to the 6 Hours of Silverstone, very much so was the same event where we got to see a great performance from Porsche, namely the Euro Titans Porsche that we saw at the time. And behind the wheel of that was Alan Alexander and the, I believe one of the head members of Euro Titans, which was Ben Meredith. And that was a great performance by those two. Sadly, it was a glitch in the pit lane that took them out of the chances to fight for the race win at the end of the day in Silverstone. But nonetheless, it's still, like Aston Martin's performance from the 112 5-star car, put on a great showcase for the Porsche 992. So we have a word in from Shay. I mean, it was a disconnect. And as we sort of piece together there for the 555, and now it's Johnston behind the wheel. Mitchell Scott looks to be in the pit lane and has not gone anywhere in that time since. This could be somewhat of a soft DNF coming up here for the Nova Sport 329. It was a bit of a rocky road for them in the opening run of the championship here. And it seems that much like their almost direct rivals at MWM, they've been playing a game of compromises in the first round. We see into the pits goes, looks to be there. That's Tim Alexander-Bleish of SRC Motorsports. You see, almost, is that the bonnet flapping on the AMG, or is that just a bit of a rendering error? Because it does look like a small amount of damage is present on the AMG. Yes, there definitely is. I'm not seeing things there into the pits, and looks like flashes for the camera. He knows he's on video. Joining him in the pit lane there, Jacob McLean of Macca Motorsport. You can definitely see much worse for wear compared to the Mercedes. Now, it raises the question over these two here for Macca Motorsports. I'm pretty sure in the case of this one here, McLean's the only one in-house, so there won't be any driver swaps to be expected of that one. There will be, though, for SRC Motorsports. And the question is, right now, will it be this stint or the next that we get to see the appearance of Catherine Lane? That's what we're waiting to see here. But a great opening stint. One definitely to be remembered there. He was fighting with the car quite some distance through the way here for Alexander Bleish, but he has put on a great show of things and definitely has the chances with the performance he's put on the table in the opening stint here to put Mercedes and by proxy SRC on the GT3 podium by the end of this opening round. They were still looking at very promising signs so far from their contemporaries down in GT4. Carson Claus, we see at the moment, could be moving up in the near future here to second, as we see in the pit lane, the leading GT4 Angus Dunk in the 328 Nova Sport car. Yet to have been released from the jacks. We see now leaving, looks to still be... I'm trying to read what the LED boards say there, but I'm pretty sure that said BLE. So Bleish is still in the car. They're still in the 63, so I have to wait another time into that final pit stop for when we see his teammate, Catherine Lane. Now, bear in mind, the reason I stress this point that we need to see both drivers on any of these multi-driver lineups is because, and this has been a repeat offence we've seen actually in quite a few of these multi-driver races, you have to field every driver you've signed up. So if it's a case where a driver's not been able to show up, but you still have them registered, you are going to be standing at the foot of our 130-second plus penalty at the end of the race. That's why we wait to see what do they do in the pit lane. Do they get another driver out on track? Because then it confirms to us no penalties coming up for these lot by the end of this race. They have got to field every single driver that they've signed up. Richard Claffey's in, and so too is, after a brilliant opening stint, then Anthony Joseph, otherwise known as Toothless, for the How to Train Your Driver team. The number 98 has led this by a country mile. Following them in, the amateurs, and the number 31, Scott Smith and Isaac Paranihi. We could be seeing a whole wad here of driver swaps. As for RTC Racing, much in the same story as we saw earlier on for some of the other cars in the pit lane. No driver swap to be expected there, a single driver entry. Last we observed for the RTC team, that's just Richard Claffey in the car. As for Paranihi and Joseph, they stand upon the chances here to swap vehicles. We see, though, for Claffey, a super short stop, and that's because this is the one thing you've got to consider. Single driver entries have got a real house advantage when it comes to pit lane runs, because they aren't spending 20 odd seconds swapping drivers. They don't have drivers to swap to. So as we've seen there for Claffey, that could very well be a deciding factor to put Porsche later down the line in this race into the lead. And I say this with quite the decent bit of gravity in this suggestion because, as we've just seen, that pit lane stop was about half the time for that of the number 98. Leaving the pits now, we see behind the wheel, looks to very well be the case that is Jakob Nielsen now in the car. So after a great stint from his teammate Anthony Joseph, Jakob Nielsen now steps in to the How to Train Your Driver car, now with a repaired nose cone as well. That damage has been sticking around on that car for quite some time. But now it seems that they managed to slam the bonnet shut just enough to where it's not an issue. At the moment then, Globdrip in the lead of things with Manuel Woodward Motorsports. Bear in mind, it's been a story for the longest time here in this race, up until the most recent departure then of Mitchell Scott was the sort of big three for Australian teams in AXRL. You had, you know, on one side of the court you had OTM, on the other side you had MWM, then you had also the presence of Novasport. But now it's just come down to 22 of those teams. MWM flanking first and third at this time, that being Globdrip and Jared Sebastiano, who has made a very solid turnaround drive. I should point that one out as well. They're currently up the road from Scott Smith, who now swaps in for Isaac Peronihi. A great opening stint from his teammate. And at the moment, sandwiched in between the pair of them is OTM, or otherwise Out of Their Minds, or On Throttle Motorsports. They've gone by many names. We know them simply as the OTM family, because they have had many different on-track names, but a lot of them do fall under the same umbrella group. I think we are about to see some potential fighting here, so we're going to go and catch on board. And we do see in the pit lanes, this is a concerning sign, that currently revolves around Carson Claus, as it has been an emergency stop. And this is something we failed to pick up on at the time that it happened, but we do see now the aftermath of it. Carson Claus in the pit lane. Was that the 56 retiring? Yes, it is. So SRC's hopes of GT4 successes to go up and alongside their GT3 campaign has now been snuffed out. As it stands then, Shanghai Shaggers leads GT4. Angus Dunk really close behind here. We could actually be seeing some fighting in GT4 in the near future. What a treat that is, as the grid is now down one of those drivers. So a few fights to consider here. We had Bleish v McLean. There is also to consider as well, as we see down there, Nielsen versus Bleish. As we've still yet to see the data precisely update itself. You can see that Nielsen, though having shown up as second, unless he is a full lap ahead, I would size it up to be the case that he is in fact behind the Mercedes car, number 63. Well, no, it actually very much is a case there. Contrary to popular belief, Nielsen is actually a lap up. I'm actually quite surprised by that one. The amount of pace then that leading pair have had, Drip and Nielsen, and to find themselves a full lap clear of cars in the same top 10 as them. I mean, it's staggering. It is truly staggering. Taking a look around, Claffey v Leatherby coming up not far from now, 1.8 seconds between the two. We also have Smith versus Sebastiano for the podium. I want to go and catch on board, though, here, what is now the fight of the lead of division here. Angus Dunk in the 328 Nova Sport. Now up and against Liam Mutz in the number 66 Shanghai Shaggers Mercedes. And just listen to the soundtrack of that 6.2. We can go at length on the development history of this unique vehicle. It's a sort of a Frankenstein's beast, brought up by the same mad scientists at Pratt Miller Engineering that gave us the Corvette C6, C7 and C8, our endurance racers up in GTE. Otherwise GT3 or former GT2/GT2B. So we see though on board in the fight currently for division first, it's contact between Mercedes and Chevrolet. They make contact. The 66 into the wall makes sizable contact with the wall. That could be serious damages there for Liam Mutz. Angus Dunk immediately pumps the brakes there to allow the Mercedes back in front of him, but that got a little too close for comfort. Suppose perhaps not maybe fully aware of his own size there. This is the biggest car in GT4. And it is an absolute juggernaut. You can see approaching from behind. That's the BMW, one of the biggest cars in current GT3. So you see looking up the inside is Angus Dunk. Still sizing up his chances here. Now admittedly trying to get the second move in without contact. So you see a bit of a wiggle though on the exit of Niki Lauda. Back on board with the Chevrolet after that brief scare. Formerly the 327, changed overnight to the 328. This is currently in that fight of division first, still with the 66. It's so nearly contact again. We have to watch between our fingers to see how these fights unfold. And you can really see, watching it from their point of view, how difficult this has proven to be. Because look here from the point of view of Angus Dunk, he just can't see the car in front of him. The amount of spray kicked out by that Mercedes as we cross over past the first hour of racing into the second hour here in the Red Bull Ring. It is so hard to make head or tail of the situation up in front of him there. Running effectively blind into the rear end. It's not hard to see where that collision came from. Looking here, Nielsen v Drip. This is definitely one for the ages here. MWM versus OTM for that matter. Down through to turn one, watching with Glob Drip. He's up against the ropes here from an advance from the BMW, trying to catch on board here with Jakob Nielsen. Currently in the fight of GT3's first place spot. Glob Drip double stinting in this leg of the race, has gone above and beyond for that Mustang. But right now, dread it, run from it. The 98 seems to be arriving all the same. Nielsen currently trying to find head or tail of it, looking through that nearly impenetrable mist kicked up by the Mustang. Much as we've seen the issues already on display for the GT4 fight for the lead, much too is the same for GT3. And bear in mind, they've even less time to react to incidents up in front of them. So as we see here down through Ralph, things are a little bit unstable, and that's on our side. So sadly, just a casualty of broadcasting from the UK to an American server for an Australian league, as you do end up with a bit of desync. We see joining them from behind is Jacob McLean. Admittedly not on for a fight of the podium here. He's 9th place, but still a great observer to this fight in front between his fellow Mustang and a BMW. Just watching for this time here, down through to lap 39 so far. And really the only indicators you've got for the greater part of things. Now, we've been watching the sort of onboard cameras, but let's look directly through the eye of the driver. This is what they're seeing. Actually, more importantly, this is what they're seeing. This is the helmet cam. We love using this one. You can see really the only indicators of where the exact edges of that Mustang are for the greater part of it are the 6 slits there of the tail lights that you see up in front of you. As you see, beyond a certain distance, any kind of distinguishable features about the car start to become a bit abstracted. On the run in towards Schlossgold, very late on the brakes to put himself up the inside. It's contact between Drip and Nielsen. Drip into the gravel traps at Schlossgold. Nielsen takes the lead, but at what cost? You see some other fights currently ongoing. Dunk v Mutz. Mercedes versus, almost said Ford there, Chevrolet. Really up against the ropes here for an early door start. Well, this broadcast running at 8 AM, which is not often when we go live here. Number 68 ran into trouble earlier on. We still continue to see here on with Angus Dunk, the fight of division lead over Liam Mutz and Shanghai Shagger's Mercedes. Mercedes up the inside at turn 4. Chevrolet around the outside. Bear in mind, when it gets down on the hammer of that 6.2, it sings there in the fight against that 4-litre twin turbo under the bonnet of the Mercedes right up alongside him. Now to the outside as we get our way into Rauch. Angus Dunk up the inside. 98 in trouble. That's the leading car, as a matter of fact. That was How to Train Your Driver. That was Jakob Nielsen, I believe. So he slowed down just before Niki Lauda curve. I think it was a case where he's let the 97 out in front on purpose. He was sort of making up for the incident those two had in the lap before down at Schlossgold corner. Oh my word, that was frightening to see there. I mean, hang on just a tick. Look at this in the replay. That Aston Martin's descended upon these two here like a horror movie villain. I mean, well, watch this. Here, as we make our way over the crest, the Aston, okay, it's about 2 to 3 car lengths. As we crest, it's just right on them. It's right on them there. So you see, though, in the time since, and you saw it in the live display in the bottom right, Dunk now firmly into the lead by a second. Fisher Paykel right behind them with the Depth Rigs Racing now up and alongside has descended upon them like a great plague there in the Aston. The Aston still in the top 5. Now, I see it to be a sizable chance here that Aston could finish beyond 5th place. I see them finishing in and around 4th by where current predictions have it. They've got the pace for it and they've got the consistency. Moreover, strategically, they've got the upper hand here on Jared Sebastiano. Still yet to have taken a driver swap over the course of this race. Yet to have taken even a mandatory pit stop to be considered as well. Now, quickly looking back on board with the leading fight as we see up the inside past the exit of Red Bull Mobile was Jakob Nielsen over Glob Drip. We see here from the 97's point of view, now having just lost out a suddenly regained race lead over the 98 in towards turn 1. And now, this is where we start to see some of the issues there. You saw that little kick out to the right as he got himself shy of the curbs on the outside on the run in towards Niki Lauda curve at turn 1. And this is a case we also saw with the BMW. That's what led to their incident down at Schlossgold. Under braking in these conditions, stability is getting worse and worse by the second. The more the rain continues to beat down upon this track, the worse it is going to get. By the way, fantastic move up the inside we just saw there from Glob Drip to get himself back firmly into a fight for the lead. They're side by side on the run down towards Schlossgold. Nielsen to the outside, technically with further ground upfield, but up the inside down at Schlossgold corner, returning the favour over that last lap. The 97 back up into the lead. We'll see, though, with better momentum upon the exit than the 98. Right up and alongside them, Nielsen has got the run for around the outside. Could be a super late apex through Rauch at turn 6. We see here, though, with the 97, Lockie Banks and Glob Drip vehemently defending the race leads away from Jakob Nielsen and Anthony Joseph of the How to Train Your Driver OTM team. Up in front of them, Leatherby currently in arms there with what looks to be, yes, that's a GT4. That's Grant Schweikert of Mango Racing BMW. Accidentally finds himself up over the nose, and it's contact there between the 97 and the 469. Wrong place, wrong time. The BMW punted out at turn 10. That allows for the 98 to just sneak on by at the inside. Major incident there. I think looking into the replays, I'm pretty sure it might be a little too... Yeah, it's sadly a little too late for our replays there to piece together precisely what's gone on between those two. We see Drip and Nielsen side by side still in that ongoing fight for the race lead up towards turn 3. Looking at the inside now, from what we could gather of that very jittery replay of things, I think that was an attempt at a sort of selling him a bit of a dummy there. Switched at the last second to put himself up the inside, but it didn't succeed. I think that's the only major issue we're going to run into over the course of covering this season. Is just going to be moments like this. And now it's at its worst when we come back from a replay because we already have a bit of desync reconnecting to the field. That, I believe, is actually due to our capturing software and less to do with the game itself. Again, I'm confused precisely as to how that works because our instant replay function doesn't utilize the, or at least it shouldn't be utilizing the Elgato. It's just taking a 15 seconds, basically snapshot of the replay buffer from our Elgato and then replaying it in slow. I think it's about 3/4 of the speed. 3/4 to about half the speed. Meanwhile, Glob Drip still defending the lead away from Jakob Nielsen. They just passed up Jason Leatherby in the 68. The 66 in the pit lanes at this time. That is Liam Mutz with Shanghai Shaggers Mercedes back into the pit lane. Jakob Nielsen leading the charge ahead of Glob Drip. Up towards turn 3, got the leg up on him, but super late on the brakes there for the Mustang to go up and around the outside, the long way around town at Remus. Bear in mind, BMW and Ford, two of the fastest manufacturers gunning on this grid here for GT3. It's BMW with the slightly better run and the better ground here up the inside. Oh my, what is going on there for that Ford? What? What? Hang on a second. Wait, hang on a second. What? What is going on there? Oh, what is happening? I mean, that's just a little bit of desync. I'm not 100% certain of that. That's some serious netcode nonsense there. We on board with Fisher Paykel. As I tried to piece together what's gone on here. Actually, oh, hang on a tick. No, don't tell me. I think we might have actually lost the 97. That, I mean, would be pretty clear signs of catastrophic netcode failure, but yeah, I think we have lost the 97. That marks the second car, I think, to have been got by a disconnect, the other being the out of their minds car, the 555 of Shamian and Johnston. But the difference is, if I'm not mistaken, Shamian and Johnston are still on the track. The 97 does rejoin the session, so taking a look here, yeah, Miles Johnston's out on track at the moment, 13th in the session. As it stands at the moment, I think he's only a single lap away from overtaking to 12th place overall. We see Globdrip rejoining the session from the pit lane, confirming there our suspicions that was a disconnect. And now this has played actually quite wonderfully into the hands of quite a few drivers. Now, to pick up the pieces on all of this, we see here Jared Sebastiano still yet to have taken a mandatory pit stop. That means that, you know, of the next two pit stops, one of them has got to be in for the long haul here. One of them has got to encompass a driver swap. It's going to be longer than what we've seen so far from some of the other drivers. Now, this plays wonderfully into the hands of both Claffey and for that of the Adeptrix Racing Aston Martin team, and also for that of Scott Smith and Isaac Perenihi, because what it tells us at the moment here, strategically, they'll be up to second. Strategically, Paykel could be moving up to third, putting Aston Martin on the podium at the checkered flag of today's race. And then, moreover, as well, we see for Richard Claffey's case, their pit stops are at half the length of any of the drivers around them. Paykel is a multiple driver lineup. He's up with the fellow driver there, which was, just taking a look back through here, Andrew Walker. Still learning all of the names in real time. Perenihi and Smith, of course, two driver lineup. Sebastiano in the 888. In this current instance, joined by Hudson Manuel. And then obviously behind them as well, you've got Tim Alexander Bleich and Catherine Lane. Now, the only other driver to be on a single driver entry in and around his local vicinity is Jacob McLean. But Jacob McLean has already had his fair share of troubles damage-wise, and that's what puts him currently down in 7th place. He's repaired the damages on that car. He's back out on the field. So in the case of Claffey, we saw that difference, and it saw that it gave him this early doors advantage in the pit lane. When we saw him come in alongside other drivers who were doing driver swaps, Claffey was in a position to where his pit stop only took half the time. So this could be a really big trump card to play here for the Porsche, for the number 93 RTC racing car of Richard Claffey, because if he's able to play his cards very close to the chest here and play this very cheeky, I would say there's not an awful lot to stop him from being up in 4th, perhaps even 3rd in this race. I think a big shift in the power balance is coming in the next hour and 46 minutes. And I think leading that charge could very well be, well, the three you see here, 3rd through 5th, it's Smith, Paykel and Claffey, and subsequently the teammates as well of Paykel and Smith, that being looking here, that'll be Andrew Walker and Isaac Perenihi. As for Jacob Nielsen and Anthony Joseph, I mean, I really don't see an awful lot stopping them here. Of course, Anthony Joseph took the win out in the multi-class madness at Kyle Army. Jacob Nielsen, we know to be a great driver in his own respect as well. It was really a sort of writing in the stars situation to get these two onto the same car for this grid. Ultimately, that's going to give the OTM group a significant upper hand here on their competition from Manuel Woodward Motorsports at the moment. Their furthest car up the field at play here was previously the 97, now driving the 97 as we see even more trouble. This is between turn 9 and 10 here. Lockie Banks makes contact with the wall on his way back to the pit lane. So as we just catch back on board of them, they made their way back out on track. We're down to only 14 cars left in this race. As really, it has been somewhat of a slaughter here at the Red Bull Ring. Could that be the nail in the coffin for the 97? And so it does appear. I've got to say, it does spell quite a grim message here for the grid coming up in the next 3 rounds. Now, of course, with every opportunity between now and round 2 of the championship for the grid to build back up its numbers. But as we see it there, we drop from what started in today's race as 18 cars. We're left with only 13 of them before we've even hit the halfway mark. We're about 14 minutes shy of the halfway mark right now. It doesn't send a particularly great message. And now this is not me having a go at race control or having a go at the drivers, but these conditions here have been brutal. And what it is going to make, in some cases, it's going to be a case where drivers aren't going to feel all too inclined to want to come back. And I've seen series play out like this before. In my experience, we've seen series collapse before under the weight of greater expectations. I think one of the best examples, the Solo Multi-Class Endurance Championship, started off on a brilliant note in NLRL. Past the halfway mark of that, it stagnated and the grid died. And that's ultimately what led to it being prematurely cancelled. Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here. What I am saying, though, is there's definitely got to be something done about that grid. I don't see GT4 surviving. And this is mostly me just speaking of my own opinion. This doesn't represent TRTN's reflection of the matter. This is more me as an individual. Where do I think things are going? I think we're going to see a lot of these GT4s come to GT3. And it's a shame. It is a crying shame. I do hope GT4 can see its way to round 2, the halfway mark of the championship, because it is a great category. It's a lot of fun. We've seen GT4 racing to blossom under these conditions, as a matter of fact. For anyone looking at a showcase of that, fret not. Later on today, we'll be looking at another multi-class race with GT3 and GT4. Round 5 of the HCCL Multi-Class Championship, Season 3 at Bathurst. So there's another multi-class race coming up. You can see that when given enough time and given the conditions to flourish, bear in mind, they had a whole season running before that of just GT3 and GT4. Then before that, they had different categories therein. So they've had to keep the ball rolling for some time for them to have what they have at the moment. Will it be a case that GT4 survives? I hope. But is it likely to with only 3 cars on the grid? No. And that's just the brutal reality of it. It would be GT3 coming up into the next part of the season. But at the same time, you know, looking back through the former Southern Endurance Series, where we started off this great endeavor with the folks at AXRL, our first major event with these guys as TRTN, that was a GT3 championship, if memory serves correctly, and it was only GT3s. And that ended up on a brilliant note, I should point out as well, because you had, if memory serves me correctly, it was MSA Autosport, Schwitzer, and Rene Gracie Racing. The privateers were going toe-to-toe with the big dogs at Schwitzer and MSA at the time. Obviously, history has now since changed. Schwitzer still does have some activity, if I'm not mistaken, on console ACC, but theirs has definitely evaded us for the longest time. I'm genuinely surprised in all of the series we've covered. We've got everywhere, really, on the totem pole now in the time since. Even up to the high highs of the XCL Pro Series, you would have expected to see a group like Schwitzer, but we've just not seen them since. They've vanished. And for MSA, they've now redistributed their assets. They've moved away from console. They've moved over to PC. So in the near future, when we move over to stuff like LMU, perhaps even at iRacing by the end of the year, we might yet see them again. But really, with a pool as wide as that on PC, chances aren't likely. Really, the only team then that remains on this grid from that old championship fight is what effectively remains of the amateurs team, the former assets of the Rene Gracie Racing team. Scott Smith and Isaac Paranihi were part of that lineup. These are drivers with significant history on this grid. Drivers we remember the history with. Now, I believe we had the chat with another driver that was on their team, as Craig Suter. We had the opportunity to sit down and chat with him on air about what their sort of expectations were coming up into that race. It was great having a chat with them. And I think it's brilliant after all this time seeing a team like that still on the grid. Albeit under a different name, now under the amateurs. right now second in this race. Aston Martin up onto the podium. So you see the Triple Eight did come in the time we were having this conversation. The Triple Eight in, and now Hudson Manuel behind the wheel. After a brilliant opening stint, I should mind as well, in the Triple Eight car from his teammate, Jared Sebastiano. I mean, he was able to really fend off with that car. Had definitely some issues. Let's not say that it wasn't exactly a breezy summer stroll here in the Red Bull Ring. It was quite a difficult challenge to face for Sebastiano. I would say a baptism by fire, but really even fire itself could not sustain itself in conditions like these. That car was just properly drowned out by the end of that first stint. Do you find it to be a curious case as well? I only just noticed this. This is not related to what's going on screen at the moment. This is just another thing. But in the Twitch chat, you can actually see when people are watching without audio. I never knew that you could do that. I'm still learning things every day on this journey. But that's a curious one. Anyway, on to the topic of the Triple Eight. 2 seconds away from Richard Claffey. So under strategy, they'll be brought, I'd say, back into that fight. Maybe for fourth, perhaps definitely for third place. But you've got to consider now, especially in the topic of Claffey, Claffey's pit lane stops, as we saw earlier on. They're half the time of these multi-driver teams. So in the case where Manuel would swap back over to Sebastiano, or Sebastiano to double stint perhaps by the end of this race, it is a case here that regardless of what strategy they now employ, they're running on pit stops that are double the time of the 93. So where they've got to make their time up, as you can see here, the physical gap between them is got to be on track. They've got to play things for combat. They can't afford to let pit stops dictate this one. Now, like I mentioned, later on in this race, they'll definitely be brought back up towards the further scope of the podium. They've had their pit stops timed up completely differently to the leading Beamers. Is there that chance, perhaps, that BMW can be intercepted by the end of this race with the procession at hand from the 31 team? I'm not entirely sure. I'm really not entirely sure. They're 19.1 seconds up the road from Fischer-Paykel in the 942 Aston Martin. There's not, I'd say, likely the chance that Aston Martin could fight for second, but they can definitely fight for where they are currently, third place for the Adept Rigs team. For Andrew Walker and Fischer-Paykel, for that matter. They have had, so far, as we head up towards the halfway mark of this race, an exceptional race thus far. Well, we're going to go and catch on board then with the Triple Eight, because you can see they are approaching the back end of the 93 at a pretty fast rate of knots here. 1.1 seconds and closing through Ralch. We're on board then with Hudson Manuel. And what is soon to be the fight for fourth. And so we'll leave you on board with these two. We'll be back in just a moment's time here in this ongoing fight for fourth between Manuel and Claffey. we continue to see here in the ongoing fight for 4th place. Now having been brought down from well within a second to about 4/10 as they make their way around Niki Lauda curve. Manuel still in pursuit. Claffey still holding ground. Now, when we get into the brass tacks of it here, Mercedes versus Porsche, let's weigh up the pros and cons that we know right off the bat. Maneuverability, Porsche. Braking distance, Porsche. Straight line speed, Mercedes. Acceleration, Mercedes. You've got the bullet, and then you've got the cruise, well, not the cruise missile, the heat-seeking missile then. One's a more direct approach, the other one can target. I suppose more bluntly, it's the hammer and the scalpel. Considering that AMG once developed a car called the Hammer, I'd say that's a pretty apt analogy. You see, though, for the 888, he has closed in very, very quickly here. And while Porsche has got them pitched for maneuverability, there is also that slight consideration that, while yes, engine-wise, acceleration is still on the side of Mercedes, in the very early stint of it. So that's an interesting statement I've just seen there in chat from True Oz Gamer. Rain ability, or like wet weather ability, Mercedes. It's curious because I've seen a very mixed bag performance from Mercedes. Until today, evidently, as we just see there, Hudson Manuel around. So yeah, maybe the case that wet weather ability is on the Mercedes side. I think it's up until today, we have a very limited understanding of what Mercedes can do in the wet because the conditions very rarely line up. The AMG, sadly, in the modern scope of ACC, is a car that is starting to go, it's starting to become a bit endangered, actually. I think there needs to be some of a conservation program for the AMG coming up because we are seeing that as a more and more fleeting number on most of the grids in the series we cover. I would say the Porsche has still got like a really solid impact for wet weather racing though. Driver skill impacts it. It is better as it's a lot easier to manage in the rain at pace. I think that also just owes to the fact that, like a lot of cars, the sort of coupe style front engine rear mount, especially in the case of the Mercedes, it's on the much more extreme end. The cockpit is very far back by design. It's got this long shoe-shaped body, as you see there. And what it does is it redistributes a lot of that mass over the rear axle. It almost gives it some of the qualities of mid-engined without the trade-off of actually being mid-engine and having too much weight over the rear axle. It's very clever what Mercedes has done. You can see some elements of that in Aston Martin, but obviously theirs is much more of a conventional coupe shape. We'll catch up with these two in a moment's time. We do have an issue here down at the Niki Lauda curve. Not actually, sorry, it's a Remus, and it's for the 470 of Luke Muscat. Was previously in the contention for 8th of Jason Leatherby, but the 470 Kisami racing car ran into some trouble. Of course, there, as mentioned as well from one of our viewers in chat, is technically front engine mid-mounted, and it's the front mid concept is where, isn't it a case where the majority of the engine actually exists just behind the front axle, as opposed to directly over it. It's a case where manufacturers, and they've been at war with this concept for some time. I think the most extreme cases you'll see is from Bentley, with the amount of space they've had to cut into the car just to squeeze the engine as far back as it dare go. And that's to try and keep a lot of the weight of that car centralized, just to give it that more poke in the corner, less risk of understeer. Of course, aero development for GT is very limited compared to its other counterparts in endurance racing. I mean, of course, you have the Le Mans hypercar era at the moment, which even that compared to LMP is a stunted time for aero development. Not to say that it's as primitive as what we get by comparison to GT3. Definitely on the simplest end of things, though, is your GT4s. I mean, they are road-ready models. They're effectively the rich man's touring car, is what we've got here. It's a case of raced on Sunday, bought on Monday, or I suppose in this case it's raced on Saturday, bought on maybe Sunday if they're open. I'm not really sure. You can see, though, that the broad contrast, as we see here with the AMG, now cutting away less from the comparison between AMG and Porsche and GT3, and more just AMG itself, in the differences between GT4 and GT3. Now, GT4 was initially introduced to be that cheaper alternative, to be the easier entry point onto the GT ladder, as it were. And in the case of the GT4s, they are, as mentioned, much, much closer, if not almost direct counterparts of road-going models. In the great scheme of it, a lot of these are manufacturer-backed. They aren't privateer-made in the case of some cars like the Chevrolet Camaro, but even that owes a lot of its, at least its visuals and also its aerodynamics. It owes from the Camaro ZL1, which was already a Chevy-backed project in the first place. For the AMG, they had the AMG GTR, of which a lot of the front aero, the front fascia there, and a lot of the engine developments were based upon the AMG GTR. Sadly, with only, I think, 2 or 3 manufacturers on the grid for the case of GT4. We do actually see in the pit lane at the moment there, Grant Schweikart making his way out. Now, the developments for the M4, I'm pretty sure came from the M4 CS. Very limited number of those cars got made, and it's a crying shame too. The M4 GTS is what I'm thinking of as well, not the M4 CS, the M4 GTS. And it's a crying shame as well because it was a very pretty car. The dark grey and orange that released in, and now we get to see here, flipped on its head, much more orange on the Mango Racing 469. Nearby fight to be considered, 470 versus 68, both cleared for their final pit stops at the halfway mark of this race. So we do see that a great schism is forming amongst this grid. Fisher Paykel is in from third on the field. And that loses in position out to Hudson Manuel and Richard Claffey, now to the back of the top 5. Tim Alexander Bleich looks to take 6th place up into 5th there. Jacob McLean follows suit as well. For Paykel, we'll see if there was that swap back over to Andrew Walker. Right now, we saw them drop off the jacks. We saw that judder from the Aston, but they can't get the car started. For whatever reason, I'm not clear what's gone on there for the 942. Something is amiss in the pit lane here. As now we see them drop off what looks to be dropping off the jacks for the second time. Again, not privy to what's gone on there for Aston Martin. This isn't looking great for them at the moment. I am filled with this great feeling of dread at this time watching what I'm seeing here, because it could very well be a case that they run into a major issue in the pit lane and can't get the car running. This is not laying a great precedent here for the 942. No current sort of answer to what the issue is. This could be any myriad of issues at the moment. It could be game side, could be client side, could even be vehicle side for all that matter. But the bottom line of it is right now, the 942 Adept Rigs Aston Martin is stranded in the pit lane, unable to move as far as we're currently clued in on. And this is an issue we've seen before. We have seen this before. Of course, we mentioned the Euro Titans car win in the conversation about Porsche when we were on board earlier on with Richard Claffey, who just crosses the line there in 4th place at the moment, 2.8 seconds from Hudson Manuel. But we've seen it to be a case before. Issues in the pit lane have stopped great performances. Could that very well be the case of Adept Rigs today? It looks to be definitely a likely possibility. Looking here with the 942 still yet to have left the pit lane. So now really in the underdog fight we were thinking of earlier, it is now the case that it rests solely on the shoulders of Claffey to potentially bring Porsche to podium glory here. We know strategically they can do half the time in the pits over Hudson Manuel in front of them and Tim Alexander Bleich behind them. They can never seem to catch a break then, Aston Martin. And definitely a bit of a bittersweet ending to what was, I would say, undoubtedly a strong performance, undone by elements out of their control. And for Fisher Paykel and Andrew Walker, unless we see them get moving again, that very likely could be the end of the story for Aston Martin in today's round of the Southern Summer Endurance Series. Well, it does leave a very bizarre precedent behind with it, and that could very well see the grid down to only 12 cars if the 942 elects to withdraw. Still yet no movement from Aston Martin in the pit lanes. So as it currently stands right now, past the halfway mark of today's race, again, it has been a slaughterhouse here in the Red Bull Ring.
Jacob Nielsen leads with Scott Smith in second, Hudson Manuel third, Richard Claffey fourth, Tim Alexander Bleich in fifth, and Jacob McLean in sixth place. Grant Scarr in seventh place, and I think we just got word through there that the... Oh no, hang on. Is it alive? It is! The Aston Martin has somehow come back out on track, but we see in the background trouble for the 63. That is Tim Alexander Bleich. And that drops him behind Jacob McLean. Grant Scarr has potentially a chance here. But no, he's a lap down, never mind. But from his point of view, we can get a look at what's gone on here. As it looked to have been a case that he's actually spun around on the exit of the Niki Lauda curve, got a little bit of the runoff on the left-hand side and turned in on the right. We've seen this happen before in drier conditions than these, so really one can only wonder just how much of that distance was he able to cover sideways in what is effectively biblical amounts of rain. We could see what appears to be no damage on the AMG, albeit Bleich will be a little bit shaken up there from that incident. Not the first time that car has tried to kill him violently. We saw that out through turns 7 and 8 much earlier in this race, and it seems that's been the real first case that AMG has bucked him off. As of right now, also from what we were able to observe, no damage to the steering system, so nothing compromised that would otherwise force Bleich to the pit lane on this lap. If he does go in, it would be by his own volition. No current suggestion of it onto lap 59. So Andrew Walker back behind the wheel on what was a very bizarre tenure of the pit lane for the Adept Rigs Racing team. It has set back a lot of what was otherwise incredible progress for them over the course of the race in the opening half, but that extra long pit stop did them absolutely no favors. It still remains a mystery as to why they were in the pits for so long. They've lost advantage over Jared Peters and Grant Scarr, and we see their trouble on the exit of Schlossgold, so any immediate signs that they'll be making advancements up over the two BMWs in front of them in the near future are now up in the air entirely. We do see, though, Grant Scarr in the number 68 Roadblock Racing car, toe-to-toe here with Jared Peters of Kisami Racing. You see on the exit of turns 7 and 8, both of those BMWs were kicking the back end out just a tad. These two could be within contention here for a fight of 7th place. We see the gap at the moment, 9/10 of a second. Now, we've had a curious case here. We've been looking through some of the reports to have happened over the last, what is now an hour and 40 minutes of racing covered of this 3-hour race today. As we stay on board here with the leading 98, the How to Train Your Driver team, leading this charge outright at this time. And we found out one of the reasons behind the withdrawal of the 56 Chevrolet down in GT4, that was from Carson Claus and Stephen Tolby, was engine damage, and also that Stephen Tolby supposedly, and now this is according to Carson Claus, so that's our current source at this time, did not set his alarm. That happens to the best of them, isn't it, really? It's a case that You got to set your alarms. That, you know what? Great reminder. Set your alarm right now. If you need to be up tomorrow for whatever reason at a time, set your alarm. We had to set 6 alarms to make sure we didn't sleep through this. Well, it's very true. Normally Saturdays when we get to have a bit of a lie-in here in the UK, but not this time around. No rest for the wicked, and surely not for us. So we find ourselves in one of 3 events today. The other one coming up will be the HCCL Multi-Class Championship. Then after that will be the Competizione Performance League World Series before we can then go to sleep again. I think I've slept for all of about 3 hours, so I am feeling very good. And that's not sarcasm. 6 seconds then between Manuel and Claffey. McLean 13 seconds down, so Claffey's got a good hold here of the top 5. We do see here, it looks like Smith passing up Schweikart. Schweikart, I should say. You see there, running off into the gravel. Grant Schweikart. A great note there from the inline 6 in that BMW. Speaking of great notes, though, the flat 6. I mean, it seems almost illegal to put a flat 6 in anything else that's not a Porsche. I mean, I had an associate of mine has got the flat 6 Legacy. The Subaru made a flat 6 engine for the Legacy. It's a 3-litre unit. Sounds with the right exhaust in there. I mean, sounds exactly like a 911. It's shocking, but it feels like the flat 6 is almost an engine that belongs to the Porsche 911 and nobody else. A design honed as far back as the 1940s, with the Volkswagen Beetle being its sort of ancestral sort of DNA, the root cause of the world's most popular sports car. 3 generations of the Porsche family were required to bring the world the Porsche 911 as we know it, in its earliest iteration, the 901 from the 1950s. Ferdinand designed the Volkswagen Beetle during the Second World War. His son Ferry and a team of engineers turned it into the 356, and then Ferry's son Butzi turned it into the 901. And the rest is history. 8 generations later, the Porsche 911 is the most easily recognizable sports car in world history. I would say the only thing more recognizable than it is any variety of Ferrari, and that's because Ferrari's managed to do one thing above Porsche, and that's master the art of social engineering. You think of a red sports car, it could be a Honda NSX, it could be a Lamborghini. To the uneducated, it's a Ferrari because it's red. Porsche never captured that, but if the car's round and it's got round headlights and it's sporty, chances are those who don't know much about cars would be starting to call it a Porsche. At the moment, in the topic of any nearby battles, not an awful lot to comment on at this time. Of course, the grid having spread out quite a distance here, taking a look at what remains of it. Started at 18 cars. We're down 5 vehicles, down to only 3 of the GT4s. It saw an overall reduction of the grid size by 25% there with the departure of the SRC number 56 Camaro. As for the GT3s, they started off with 14 units in all. They now have only, by the scope of it there... Oh, that's not looking good. There's only 10 remaining. Down 4. Now, that's for a myriad of issues, not just crashes. Of course, that will be a playing factor, as we saw for Nova Sport. Persistent damages and issues with controlling the vehicle ultimately forced them out of the race. We see Angus Dunk coming in. The last of the GT4s to fully clear themselves then for the checkered flag, and this could invite Liam Mutz back into the fight here for the lead of division. Of course, these two did clash heads back in their previous fight for the lead in GT4. The Mercedes and the Chevrolet head-to-head on a number of occasions throughout today's race. We'll see whether or not we're in for the play of one more. Bear in mind that, of course, and we had this issue trying to do the numbers in our mind over the stint, like when would be the latest time to see them back into the pit box for the 55-minute stint limit. So we're not even going to try and get in on that, but bear in mind we do, by the numbers at the moment, have at least for the majority of the grid another pit stop coming. I think we can safely rule out extra pit stops coming up for anyone who's pitted after the remaining 55 minutes of the session. But we do see with this bizarre set of regulations, it does introduce this very key element of strategy. They've got to play these unorthodox strategies out. Otherwise, you just play it by the book. You're left with, roughly gauging it here, about 10 minutes of overlapped time, 10 to 15 minutes of overlapped time at the end of the session that you still need to pit for. Otherwise, your stint limit will run over and you will get a penalty. Catching on board here, we see sweeping up over the nose of Angus Dunk, Hudson Manuel in the 888 MWM car. That does drop in the Camaro up onto the nose of Liam Mutz in the 66 Mercedes. These two very close to one another at this time as we see the run down towards Schloss Gold on the exit of Remus. You can see the weather, it really doesn't show any sign of relinquishing its stranglehold of racing today. We'll stay on board here with Angus Dunk and Liam Mutz. Two single driver entries at the forefront of what remains of GT4. Watching here with the fight of the lead. In the meantime as well, Richard Claffey and Jacob Nielsen have come into the pit lane. Up in the top four of GT3. You also see here the battle really start to put some distance over each other. 1.6 seconds on the run to Remus there between the Mercedes and the Chevrolet. Angus Dunk continuing to open the taps up there. 6.2 litres against 4. Really does seem to be no replacement for displacement. We've been saying it so many times. That's starting to sound like a broken record, really. When it comes down to the brass tacks of GT4, Chevrolet has dominated throughout. Very few, if any, competition on the most part. We see also in the pit lane as well with Scott Smith. We see that being released from the pit lane there goes Jacob Nielsen. The question therein remains, has he handed back over to his teammate Anthony Joseph, otherwise known as Toothless? We'll get the update on that as he leaves the pit lane here in the 98. Or is it a case here where we might see his teammate a little further down the line? Bear in mind of the time remaining of the session, 55 minutes, of course, on maximum stint limit. So under that logic, it is a case where they will have to pit one more time before the end of this race. Now, that would be roughly with about, and I want to say about 15 minutes left in this race, or thereabouts. So that's the case we currently find ourselves in at the moment. On board with the number 98 here. Still unconfirmed at this time whether or not it's still Nielsen. We've not yet got any update if it is or not. I believe it. Yes, it is. Okay, it is still Jacob Nielsen behind the wheel. NIE there. So, liable to see then his teammate Anthony Joseph a little further down the line. Perhaps in the closing quarter hour of racing then here at the Red Bull Ring. cutting back on with the lead of the GT4 fight. Angus Dunk versus Liam Mutz. 1.6 seconds between the pair as they exit Remus again here on lap 62. Coming up on the end of the second hour. As it stands right now, as the weather continues to cause havoc on track, Mercedes struggling to keep wind there with Chevrolet. Catch back on board with these two a little later on down the line, but as it stands right now, battling still kept at a relative low. Close gap there to be observed. McLean v Bleish, 2.3 seconds in closing, so we'll be on board here with the Mercedes of Tim Alexander Bleish. And this does present a unique situation here because we can see BLE. So Bleish still cleared for the last pit stop, but he's not yet fielded his teammate. So is it a case that maybe in the last 15 or so minutes when we get onto the real last end of available pit stops or anywhere between now and that point, that then we can then see his teammate? Because that does raise a question here. And we're looking through the data we have, at least on SimGrid. Now, this is what gives us the full confirmation of driver lineups. Catherine Lane, at the last interval, was still updated to be on that roster. We've not yet seen him once. She's yet to make a single appearance on track, has not been fielded in by her teammate, Tim Alexander Bleish. So it does leave these two open to a penalty at the end of this race, and I'm sure that is something they strictly want to avoid. I don't think we have any other situation like that currently. Every other driver we have now seen on the field in some capacity. The only driver yet to have come back into the pits for their last stop here, the 888 MWM Mercedes of Hudson Manuel. Up alongside him in that car, Jared Sebastiano. Those two having had a very solid time of things here, still intercepting the current tide of BMW, but by how much longer can they hold that line? A, with the pit still to be served here. B, with Paranihi closing in at a fast rate of knots 5 seconds and under. As we see up in front here, Hudson Manuel running up into traffic. Up ahead of him there, you can see is Tim Alexander Bleish and Jacob McLean just behind them. At this time, I believe that to be... That is Shamian, yes. But Bleish, 2.1 seconds and closing on McLean. There could be that interesting fight there just for the back of the top 5. Bear in mind, for the perspective of both of them here, they're about a quarter of a lap down from Claffey, who himself is about, looking at it there, a full lap down on Paranihi. So realistically here for Bleish, his chances are really to fight with these two for, at the best of times, 4th place, because Paranihi is actually about to come up and lap them not far from now on the trajectory he's been on over the course of the last 2 hours. So then, only a few more pieces left to fall into the puzzle before we get the set piece for the last hour of racing here at the Red Bull Ring. It has definitely been a bit of a crowd splitter race. I mean, it's an odd start to the season indeed, with just how brutal conditions have been for the first round of 4. It has not been kind on newcomers. And I suppose it has set the tone here that this Endurance Series, despite its otherwise pleasant sounding name, Southern Summer Endurance Series, is going to be anything besides a walk on the beach. It is going to be a walk through the 10 or so rings of hell, by the sounds of it. So it's Going to be interesting to see how things get picked up later down the line. Now, to bring back up that conversation as we stay on board here with the 63 in its close pursuit of the 73 up in front of them, that being Jacob McLean. Bring back up the conversation about the calendar. Just looking up here to the right-hand side, of course, coming up onto the last hour of racing, not far from now here at the Red Bull Ring. The next round coming up will be at the Circuit Zandvoort, home of the Dutch Grand Prix, then over to Imola, home of the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix, well, the former Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix now, as it has now been axed from the calendar in this year's Formula 1, and then to Spa, home of the Belgian Grand Prix. In that last lap, faster by just nearly 0.6 of a second over McLean. Blyche has really got the burners on now on the number 63, and he's closing in fast for control of the top 5. So you see from the onboard of the 63, we're very much in the conversation now of that ongoing fight for 5th. The 73 up in front, eclipsed there in finer detail by the tremendous amount of spray still being kicked up at this time. The weather having shown absolutely no mercy over the course of this race. Evidently, that's still enough to throw a blindside in the face of drivers that have already acclimatized themselves to the conditions at play today, such as Blyche. Running out wide there. I mean, are we starting to see perhaps a little bit of some cracks forming in the facade here? Mercedes have been struggling on terms of pace, at least in terms of the 63. I mean, that is quite severe amounts of understeer starting to settle in over the 63 at this time. They have played a relatively oddball strategy in today's race. Bear in mind, it's completely open-ended strategy, so we're not of yet, liberty to divulge if we know if drivers are taking on new tyres. We simply just don't have the data to hand on that. Usually it can be guessed from when the drivers have sudden spurs of pace after leaving the pit lane. There's a pretty telltale sign. As you see here, this is what currently the situation in the 942 Adeptrix Racing Aston Martin. They were on for a very solid result today, but whatever happened to them in the pit lane, we're very curious to find out what exactly happened for these two to set them down at 9th. For McLean, he's been able to hold things relatively easy at the moment. Not been struggling anywhere near as much as the Mercedes behind him for available grip at this time. Now, the elephant in the room is the strategy difference between the 888 and the 31. On the track they're on at the moment, the chances do look very, very likely here for the amateurs to return to second. Slowly chipping away at the gap they've held between themselves and the 888 of Hudson Manuel and Jared Sebastiano with Manuel Woodward Motorsports. But the elephant in the room is that bright orange marker next to the number on their car there. That indicates they still have a mandatory pit stop to serve, and even after that, I think they're trying to time this up to be within the last 55 minutes so that they can just go all the way to the checkered flag. Problem is, if their stint timers don't match up and they have to do it before that point, well, now they have buffer zones left over at the end of the race by if I could get the words out, by which means they'll have to come into the pits before the end of the race again. So, as I've been informed then by representatives for the 888, 45-minute sprint at the end for the 888. That's where they're aiming for. They're coming in the next 15 minutes, aiming at 45 minutes left to go in the race for their last pit stop. So, well, that definitely has played. Everyone else has to stop again for the timer. So they have definitely angled this one up to be Definitely within a chance of a podium. There's no doubts upon that one. These three have carved away a very unique stance of this grid where they effectively cannot be caught unless catastrophic damages ensue for the leading three. And they've also had it now to where competition is totally localized amongst each other. So even after that pit stop, the chances therein still remain very likely they'll emerge at the very worst of times, like 4th on this field at this time. I mean, take a look at the gap here. So you've got Nielsen at the forefront. He's on the exit of Niki Lauda curve up through turn 2. Then you look further down the track here. You've got Sebastiano and Manuel. They're second. They're just on the exit of turn 10 as the race leaders make their way up towards turn 3. Paranihi is about a corner and a half behind there as the AAA makes its way down towards Niki Lauda curve. This one's just making its way out of so this is actually more realistically just a corner away. Just makes their way out of turn 10. Then you go from them to Claffey, and Claffey is a full half a lap, if not slightly more than that, down over Paranihi. So that's what I'm getting at here, where the competition is almost entirely localized amongst themselves on the podium right now. Nielsen, Manuel and Paranihi, the current stewards of it in that top 3, but by proxy their teams, How to Train Your Driver, Manuel Woodward Motorsports and the amateurs have carved away a unique holding in today's race standings. And as we drop into that last hour, this is where it currently stands before we get what is going to be some of the most important pit stops of this round. This could heavily decide position by the end of this race. It's Jacob Nielsen leading ahead of Hudson Manuel and Isaac Paranihi, of course, in 3rd place. Richard Claffey in 4th and Jacob McLean in 5th. Not far from being intercepted there as you see the introduction of the number 63 into the fray. Having closed back in some of that time lost is Tim Alexander Bleich. Grant Scar in 7th, Jared Peters 8th and Andrew Walker in 9th. Then for the GT4s, division lead then for Angus Dunk by 4 seconds over Liam Mutz. Then into the GT3s again, we find Shamian after that disconnect. Shamian and Miles Johnston, for that matter, with Out of Their Minds, is in 12th overall, but that's provisionally 10th in division. So still seeing a top 10 by that technicality by the end of this race, even in spite of that heavy disconnect they suffered. And then behind them, Grant Schweikart in the number 469, division 3rd, but overall 13th. I think what raises a unique question amongst these drivers at the moment. We know that the Triple Eight has to come in and stop in order to fulfill the prerequisites of that mandatory pit stop. What we do also know is Paranihi doesn't have to do that. So for Paranihi, this does present a unique case here where the amateurs, in theory, now this is just the theory on our end, if we were in their position, it would be a case whenever the Triple Eight comes into the pits, follow them in and just do the run through to reset the stint timer on the ground that that's legal. I have no idea if it is in this championship. I know some leagues made that illegal. But if that's what they wanted to do and they wanted to have that counter to where, oh, look, we've also reset our stint timer, we can face you all the way down to the checkered flag, and they want to have that one-on-one, that absolutely is a case that they can attempt to do that. We'll see, though, as of course that is set to follow up in about 11 minutes time here, as per predictions from representatives of the Triple Eight, saying that they're gunning for the 45-minute sprint to the checkered flag as part of their current strategy. Now, it's a huge gamble. It is a huge gamble knowing that, especially now on the table that we've even discussed it ourselves, if we were able to come up with a strategy, and we're terrible at race strategy. That's why I don't do GT3. But if we could think of it, I'm sure they've already thought of it. So you see the gap continuing to progress here between the number 73 and the number 63. Jacob McLean has done well so far to hold off an advance by Tim Alexander Bleich, who's been struggling more with his car in the last couple of laps, but it seems he's now found a bit more of a stable rhythm. We do see in the pit lane at this time as well as the 66th, and that would be Liam Mutz with Mercedes making their way out very slowly. Not entirely clear what's gone on here. He's stopped at the exit of the pits. Lights green. It can't get much greener than that. We saw there, he was effectively waiting for Angus Dunk to leave. Well, not to leave the pit lane, but for him to get out past the pit lane. It does raise itself a few unique questions, because now he's a lap down over Angus Dunk. And seemingly no explanation as to why on earth he would have waited that long on the exit of the pit lane. It's a very, very bizarre little case here. Moreover, he just did a switchback on a GT3 car, so he's very clearly not happy. Stint timer. Yeah, that's a great suggestion. So yeah, no, it does make sense. The stint timer does reset as you cross the exit of the pit lane, not when you get into the entry of it. So you have to time these up actually very closely. If it's a case where you'll run like a minute over, and that's a penalty if I'm not mistaken. So it's a case where they've got to play this very tactically. So that would explain why he was holding short of it. He wanted to be with just about a minute of buffer space ahead of the race finish, so that he would certainly not find himself in any trouble. We see in the pit lane at the moment is the number 469. So that's the BMW of Grant Schweikert. Currently in the pits at this time. Bear in mind, that will completely clear him now of anything penalty-wise. Stint timer more than healthy with 53 minutes left to go. So going to catch on board here. McLean now separated from Bleisch by Hudson Manuel in the middle of them. 3.4 seconds, so a considerable buffer here on the 63 in the last couple of laps we've seen since. In terms of nearby fights, I mean, we are very much so out of range of many, if any, at all. I think one of the closest ones we had on record for the longest time was Bleisch versus McLean, but I'd say even in this case right now, the current phase it's in, I don't see the chances likely we'll be getting some side-by-side action unless mandated by pit lane stops. I just don't necessarily see it by the way that things have been currently going lately. So we see for all of these drivers at the moment, they're in the sort of point of no return here. You come into the pits and you're cleared for the race finish. And it's a case here where it now is the best possible time to try and fix these stint timers, as it would give you the longest amount of time to fix any issues in terms of position loss, but also enough in the case to where you would still be able to get to the finish line, no penalties in question. Well, let's go and get on board with some of the drivers in the sort of bulk of the field here. We see with Hudson Manuel trying to navigate around this fight between Bleisch and McLean. Bear in mind, 5 minutes from their golden ratio strategy, aiming at a 45-minute sprint on brand new tyres. Now, under those sort of conditions, they'd lose second place out to Paranihi, but as mentioned by some of their associates in our Twitch chat, they would emerge with stronger tyres. They would have more grip to play with. And really, it'd be a case where they haven't got to be dainty about it. They've not got to conserve the tyres. They've 45 minutes to the checkered flag. The tyres can take the punishment. They will hammer it to ensure that second place exists. They'll be satisfied with whatever result they take away, so long as it's a podium. That's at least what I've been told. But I think we could definitely see among the more aggressive performances emerge in the next 45 minutes coming. You see there, getting up and around Angus Dunk, leader of the GT4 category at this time. See there, it looks like almost a little touch between the two, and that has reignited the conditions necessary to form this fight for 5th place between Jacob McLean and Tim Alexander Bleich. So back on board then with the AMG from SRC Motorsports. He gets up on the inside there of Angus Dunk with Nova Sport Chevrolet. And that's his target in sight there. The Maka Motorsport number 73 Mustang. A great exit on Remus, an area where Mercedes has had a few issues in the past, especially in today's race. We are very much so, and I am quite surprised to be saying this, but we are actually in a battle in this length of the race, and it's for 5th. You see their big step out though, down through turn 9, a huge chunk of water kicked up over the underside of that car. Taking a look on the replay, this is down through turn 9, so we see exactly where it started. This is on the run into turn 9, turns in, there's just no grip, he's out onto the water. That's full aquaplaning there, you can see it's completely slick. Joins back in, snaps back onto the racing line. Now 3.1 seconds exists between the two. The chances for them to fight like that again remain very slim under these conditions. In the meanwhile, though, I think we do see, yes, Hudson Manuel is into the pit lane. And as we see as well, just leaving now onto the last stint of this race, the number 98, back behind the wheel then is Anthony Joseph, otherwise known as Toothless. In the time since, we also see then that Paranihi has taken the lead. But what we do understand is that they've still got to pit before the end of this race. So it's a case where they're just extending long now, trying to build the gap as far as they can stretch it before they bite the bullet and come back to the pits. We see though on the exit, Triple Eight cleared for exit and cleared for the last stint of this race. No questions asked. They played things just a little bit on the safer end. 47 minutes over 45, but nonetheless, back out on track. 3rd place so far. Still very much so within a chance of a 2nd place finish today, and that's subject to whatever happens for the 31 Amateurs racing car of Isaac Paranihi and Scott Smith. We see much in the same case as we saw for Alexander Bleich. It was a case there for Anthony Joseph. Huge amounts of understeer down at turns 9 and 10. It does raise itself a unique question here as to if that area can even be classified as safe if conditions are to continue the way that they are. I mean, looking at the weather radar here, it's going to stay about the same intensity that it is within the next 30 minutes here. So by the time we get to the last quarter hour, as we now see that it is Jared Sebastiano behind the wheel in place of Hudson Manuel. Is it a case that by the end of this race, our driver's even going to be able to take that section anywhere close to competitively without running that risk of effectively taking themselves out? got to consider as well, if we go and catch on board here, this is with Jacob McLean. Meanwhile, Jared Peters into the pit lane at this time. Heading down through this section, especially at this point here, it's very difficult for a dry line to persist. It's running downhill. There's constant rushing water at the surface level brushing over that dry line, and it's creating this veneer almost of a constant flow of rainwater that's making it very, very difficult for the dry line to continue. Especially with the grid number dropping down as dramatically as it has. Had it been a case where we'd see maybe upwards of 20 or so drivers, you'd have more drivers heading down range of that area, keeping that dry line in play. But the case therein remains at the moment that it's just not enough on this grid at the moment to continue to form a safe enough dry line, as we've seen evidenced already on 2 separate occasions, one from Mercedes, one from BMW. As we see here, Grant Scar down into the same section of the track. Now, it's very hit and miss. Even the slightest hint of deviation off of that dry line, as we've seen already, can create a very quick cascade effect. Into the pits then, Shamian in the 555. The same for Andrew Walker in the 942, Adept Riggs Aston Martin. Just having a look then in towards the pit lane, we see Fisher Paykel now back behind the wheel for the final stint of round 1. You see there almost immediate troubles on the run down towards Remus. I believe in the time since we... Hang on a tick here. Where did... Oh no. I'm trying to confirm exactly what it is I've seen here, but I'm pretty sure the number 63, that being Tim Alexander Bleich and Catherine Lane, I'm pretty sure they're both out. Now, this had not crossed my radar up until very recently here, but just gunning for the confirmation. And supposedly an issue occurred between the... Having a look. Yeah, no, because we're also out with Glob Drip. Is also out of this race. So we've lost 2 more drivers down to a grid of only 12 cars. We're down 6 vehicles from the race start. Most recent among them was the 63. And by that proxy as well was Glob Drip's car. That's at least according to a testament from Tim Bleich. Was blaming Glob Drip for whatever it is that did happen there. The 63 does reconnect. But it is a bit of a confusing one. 41.5 minutes left to go then in what is worsening conditions in this race. I mean, there is not a particularly great deal that can be discussed at this time. It is a case where a lot of drivers now are just attempting to survive the Red Bull Ring, let alone battle on it. So we see into the pit lane goes Grant Scar. I'll leave you on board with the Roadblock Racing car on this run through the pit lane. We'll be back in just a moment's time. still watching on board now, moving over to the race lead with the number 31 of Isaac Paranihi behind the wheel. It does leave many a question as to when will these two draw the line on when they come into the pits for the last time this race, because we know they're no longer cleared for a full send to the checkered flag. They didn't pit within the last 55 minutes of the race. With 38 left to go, it does leave the gap relatively open-ended as to when to expect them into the pits, but we know it's anywhere between now and 5 minutes left in the race. I would say more feasibly anywhere between now and within the next sort of 28 minutes to sort of 10 minutes left in the race. Because ultimately that is going to shape what the rest of this podium is liable to look like. I mean, this is something that the number 98 team has been waiting for effectively all of this stint now in the last nearly 30 minutes into the last hour of racing. As suggested there by Truos Gamer in chat, if they stopped every 55 per the time and they'd have 15 minutes remaining to when they have to stop next. I don't think they've done it exactly on 55 though, every single stint. I think they've had to hybridize it towards the middle of the race. I do seem to recall that they haven't done it exactly every 55. So it could be a case where they've... it's always going to be in the positive, so it could very well be the case where it's closer to maybe 17, maybe to 18 minutes. I think feasibly what they'll end up calling it is not exactly where the upper limit is for them. I think it's going to be when they start to notice a downturn in performance. And I think until Paranihi sees that, it's really whatever gives up first. It's whether or not they run out of time and have to come in, or whether or not the car starts to flag. And I think the first moment that it does, that will be their telltale sign. Again, it's hard to discern what the strategies are going to be for the majority of these teams because, of course, unlike the unique perspective we have in this race here where we've got people who are behind the scenes on some of the cars like the 888, we just simply don't know what's going on for the 31. A lot of this is guesswork at the end of the day. It is sort of figuring out, trying to piece things together from our point of view, seeing, you know, some of the performance we've seen, seeing the lap times that we've seen, seeing the way that the car's feeling. And that's effectively all we can piece it together with. And the moment they do come into the pits, then it's go time here for the 98. We've got more information to hand now from the folks over at the number 31, or at least someone claiming to represent their amateurs to pit. Around 20 minutes to go. Should come out with about 2 to 3 seconds worth of a lead. Now that's as per their own calculations, so take a lot of that with a grain of salt. About to see here for the 555, Miles Johnston up to what looks to be 10th place then. So that is quite the miraculous turnaround they've experienced over at Out of Their Minds. The 555 team had that disconnect way earlier in this race, but Johnston and Shamian now having forged their way back to the top 10 through sheer grit alone. So looking back over to the leading BMW. So we were right on the assertion it'd be in and around the 20-minute mark here, as I highly doubted it was going to end up being a case where it would be dead on 15 minutes. I don't really think any team has ever managed that exactly. There's always going to be a few seconds either way of it. Presently, that puts 12 minutes left on this stint for Paranihi, so that raises the question as well. Will it be a case that he double stints for this final run, or is he going to hand things over towards his teammate for that final stint? If they're set to emerge 2 to 3 seconds, are really I think the priority would have been whoever is better in close quarters fighting. You see here the lead of the GT4 division. It's got to have been a interesting race, I imagine, then, for that of Angus Dunk. Of course, not going to be arguing with a division win, but considering he spent the majority of his time by himself today, it's got to have definitely been a bit of a lonely drive in the Chevrolet. When GT4 had only 4 cars turn out, one of which is already retired, leaving only 3 left, it's definitely leaves a lot to be desired of GT4. I think it's the personal standpoint, having looked through the polls, whether or not GT4 should remain or it should be all GT3s. I'm of the opinion that as much as I'd like to see GT4 for the rest of the season, if it's going to be in numbers like this, it's just really not worth the time having these drivers effectively strand themselves away from one another for the entire race with nothing going on. Ultimately, we're curious to see where that vote will go, if it does go in the direction of putting it all in GT3, or whether or not GT4 does remain. Of course, that will be questions that we come to answer later down the line into round 2 of the championship. And speaking of getting the more precise dates, now this is all, bear in mind, in local time for us, so not AEDT, which I was told was the time zone we're operating off of for AXRL. March 7th is when we'll see the next race in this championship, and that'll be round 2 at Zandvoort, then March 28th for Imola, and April 11th for Spa. So we've got a full month between now and round 2. For all we know, the GT4 grid could undergo a proper renaissance in that time, and we could see a real shift up in numbers across both categories, enough to justify its existence come round 2 of the championship. It could conversely be a case that GT4's assets are liquefied and we find ourselves in a case where we can now double the numbers up on GT3, and you'll find maybe 30 GT3 cars for that second race. Of course, information we're all willing to divulge when we get to that point in March. So you see there up the inside, Luke Muscat in the number 470. So really at this time, our focal point for where fighting is going to emerge from, we know in 9 minutes time roughly, is when the number 31 will come in to the pit lane, and that therefore kicks the door open on what could very well be a fight to the checkered flag. Under their own calculations, the folks over at the Amateurs Racing predict they'll be about 2 to 3 seconds up over the How to Train Your Driver team. And under those calculations, you know, and hoping that they are correct, this could make for quite serious fighting in that last 20 minutes. We know how comfortable those two cars are with each other. They formed the basis of that front line for the race start some nearly 3 hours ago. Bear in mind, there is also the element to be considered as well of that 888 really not too far away at all. By about a corner and a half there is Jared Sebastiano with Manuel Woodward Motorsports. So looking at it at the moment, until we get those final run of pits, and I don't imagine it's going to be just the case with the 31 is the one coming in. I imagine there's a few other teams here still yet to put the finishing touches on what their stint timers are concerned with in the last 27 minutes of racing. We know for a fact in the next 7 minutes coming, we'll be seeing the number 31, but who else may be following in their tracks here? And we're starting to see perhaps a bit of a decline away from the performance they've been seeking out all race. Apparently, he now losing the fastest lap over to that of Anthony Joseph. So the question therein remains, with the 98 very clearly in pursuit now, not showing any signs of slowing down, performance is no longer stagnating for the 98 team. The 31, it's very much the case here where they can no longer maintain their bottom line and are now losing out at their best of times now against a very recent stint for the 98. Is it a case where they call it maybe a few minutes early, or are they going to run it for the next 6.5 minutes? That functionally builds up for about 3 or 4 laps here, perhaps even 5 at a squeeze before they come to the pits for their last time today. So into the pit lane most recently went the 328 for the last time today, Angus Dunk. I believe due to that pit stop, that does allow Miles Johnston up to 9th overall in this race. That's according to the telemetry there. We'll wait for an update on the matter, but ultimately it does little to affect his standing in the GT3 category, still comprising 9th in division, but now it's 9th in a quite literal sense to follow. You got to hand it to them. I mean, that is a real turnaround. The fact that no one would have really been expected to come back from that, to have a disconnect and to have been out of the race for that long. They're out 5 laps from the leaders. No one in the great majority of people that we've seen to do these races would ever have been expected to continue on and complete the rest of the race, and moreover to come back into the top 10. That is a serious sign of commitment to it. You've got to hand it to the not the 55, the 555, I should say, the 555, for knuckling down and getting the job done. albeit there's only 9 active GT3s left in this race, but these 9 are the survivors of what has been an absolutely brutal opening round of this championship. One that with it leaves many questions for the remainder of this series. I think maybe the top priority is going to be to have the numbers definitely up from this round. I'd be lying if I didn't say that things have definitely been difficult to cover in this race, considering that the drivers have been so far and few between. They've been scattered around the grid. Not often do they find themselves in close proximity with one another, and often in such cases does it not last long enough for us to really make a lot out of. In the case of having multiple divisions, it is definitely a case in order for GT4 to survive to Zandvoort, it needs to be more than what it is right now. I mean, it started the season off 5 entered, 4 arrived, 3 currently still in service. So it's a case here where if they are to justify the means of GT4, they have to, I'd say at this point, need to hit probably about 7 to 10 cars minimum. Where they were standing at the time, and you can see the vision. I'm not having a go. I don't want it to seem like I'm being critical of Race Control's decision to run multi-class. Everyone wants to run multi-class because multi-class is fun. Multi-class is a brilliant idea, but the problem is, as we saw with such previous case examples as the SME on NLRL, multi-class, like a lot of style of racing, is somewhat of a trend for ACC. And trends, they have their highs and their lows. They have their gain and fall. And when multi-class racing goes out of fashion, a lot of series that are in the midst of preparing for multi-class suddenly have a lot of issues with driver commitment and drivers wanting to run the lower divisions when the higher division is right there. That's their decision to make, though, at the end of the day. I think, personally, if the opportunity is there and they can find people that are willing to run GT4s, I think, by all accounts, it should be a feature of the series. I think it does bring a unique blend to it all. And as we've seen, and as we're going to see possibly later on today, multi-class racing in the right environment can work. I think where the issue exists at the moment is for multiple driver per car series. It's difficult to find enough people wanting to do GT4 even on a single driver per car basis, but then you throw in multiple and you've effectively split the amount of people willing to drive for GT4 down the middle. And even then, this has proven to be quite the unique challenge, because of the 4 cars that entered this race, only one of them was multiple drivers, and that was the SRC car. As it turns out, his teammate didn't even show up. That's according to one of the drivers of the 56. So, coming up on that fabled 20-minute mark, Jacob McLean into the pit lane, but the driver we're waiting to see then is still out on track, Paranihi. This is that fabled pit stop coming. Is it a case, though, that how close is this to their actual threshold? Is it a case where, as previous predictions would have it, this is a slight sort of overestimate of the amount of time they have left, just so that they can be on the safer end? Or is it a case where this was down to the mark, because they do stand upon the chances here of big trouble if it is the latter? McLean back out on track there. And by looks of it, still holds on to a top 5, so you've got to hand it to him here. Great result on the way. Same story for Richard Claffey, for that matter. 4th place for Porsche. Here we see with Paranihi, this is what they've been strategizing over. The case is now, do they execute? Down through to turn 9. I do not believe what it is I am seeing then. They had it placed at around 20 minutes left to go, yet now we see them overextending. 19.5, coming on 19. The case is now, we definitely know there's a lot more in the tank stint-wise for the 31 team to play with. But how much more exactly? when lap times are getting up in and around the range, looking at the timetables here, I mean, we take a look as we're on the cusp of our 100th lap of racing. Looking at it right now for Paranihi, this is in the last couple of laps that he's had, and it's 136s, 135s there in that ballpark. Let's say, for the sake of brevity, about a minute and a half here. I mean, they've got feasibly about 2 laps before the maximum cutoff, and I would say that's not even close. I'd say it's a case where they've probably got a lap, and this is among the last we'll see of them before they come into the pits, and even then they've got to get through the pit lane. Whether or not they just roll straight on through to reset the stint time, or whether or not they stop and drop, is another question entirely. We know that they fielded both drivers, so there's no risk of penalty under those regulations, but it is going to be a case now, if they are dangerously close to their threshold, which we have every reason to believe they are, this has to be it, surely. Or are we about to be proven wrong once again? It is definitely proven to be quite the surprise over the course of this race, and there it is again. So maybe, as suggested earlier on by True Oz Gamer, it is a case where they have got this one timed up. Really, really close. In next lap, though, according to one of their representatives. So traffic had really really hurt him, so it was a drive-through only. So also in the pit lane as well, we go on with the 66 Mercedes. Liam Mutz in the pit lane. Also in the pits at this time, you see joining him there in the foreground is Richard Claffey. Now, does that kick open the doors here for McLean to move back to 4th place? Claffey's at a full stop in the pits, likely to put new tyres and fuel on the car. We'll see, though, as we've seen his pit stops to be lightning fast. He has prioritised certain assets there, and I'm pretty sure by gander of it, there weren't any new tyres on. So, if anything, it would have been just enough fuel to get him to the end of the race, but ultimately, as he leaves the pit lane now, we just saw him cross over the pit limit line. That has been the deciding factor in what keeps him up and ahead of Jacob McLean as we enter the last 17 or so minutes of racing. So very closely had in control of that 4th position, and I still see it likely these two could fight by the end of this race. We see the gap between the pair is really not all that much now. It's about, I'd say, not even half the distance of that straight up between turns 1 and 3. 2.7 seconds as it updates there. Meanwhile, for the 31, this is what they've been waiting to do. They were held up in traffic, and that seriously hurt their endeavours on this strategy. But it is really a case of better late than never. But 21 seconds hold between themselves. And at this time, Toothless and the number 98, you can see them looming in the background. We see Mutz has come in, and this is a permanent stop for the 66. And we see there the complaints come in from him. Couldn't be bothered finishing the race, so boring, just 3 cars. So I think that ought to serve, really, as an indication over the current state of GT4. Don't get me wrong, look, we love GT4 here on TRTN, and it would be a shame to see it go, but you can see it from the drivers. They're just not having a fun time. And unless the grid can evolve way beyond the means it currently operates at to accommodate for 15 cars on both sides of it, which it failed to do in the run of things today. They were just under the mark for GT3 coming in by just 1 car. But for GT4, it was dire straits. They were shy of 11 vehicles beneath threshold. So unless they can get to that point by March, there's just not a future where GT4 has a place in this championship, and that's a pity. Obviously, that's not our position to comment wholeheartedly. We're saying this just from an analyst's point of view, but this is ultimately down to what race control decides to do. I think they'll definitely take a lot of what has been seen here in this race from both the drivers and from our point of view of any hopes on board as the considerations continue for a future for GT4 in this series. And you can see, I can see it from both sides. I can see it from both sides, the case where GT4's got to go. There's not enough drivers in it. It's not creating the racing that it was originally, prophesized to make. It's just not working out the way that they would hope. On the other end, it was one of the unique selling points of this series. It was what distinguished it from the previous Southern Endurance series, was the fact that this brand new series ran during the sort of summer season in Australia, I'm assuming, hence the name, and this one would, unlike the last time that we had an endurance season on AXRL under the same moniker, this one was going to have multi-class as its unique feature, and obviously taking that away kind of strips it of the novelty it was supposed to have over something like, for example, the Southern Endurance Series. So I could see it from both sides, and I'm curious to see what Race Control comes out with over the course of the next month. In terms of where we stand, we're on for the full season. We signed off the contract as well with the folks at AXRL. We're more than happy to continue to work with these guys at their own discretion. If they want to change things about the series, then they will do that, and we'll be the first to know about it. Ultimately, that's their call, and that's our sort of 10 cents of the situation. It's been an interesting start by most accounts, and that's not to say that the race has been... well, I'm trying to think of the word without it sounding blunt. That's not to say that the racing has been bad. Far from it. It's the fact that, like any nature of endurance racing, it is very situational at the best of times. You do end up often with the cases, like we've had throughout this race, where you have these, ironically, given the conditions of play here, drier conditions, or drier states of the race, where not an awful lot is going on because strategy plays such a hefty hand. And I think the conditions they've brought into the regulations for this race have definitely facilitated things like this. You have that open strategy, you let drivers strategize, you give them this unorthodox stint limit, and you do end up with scattered grids on smaller size grids like this. But as we're about to see here, it does brew the conditions necessary every now and again to give us these fights that we've been searching for. And we see it here from the 73, the Macca Motorsports car of Jacob McLean, now hunting down Richard Claffey of RTC Racing. You see here, side by side on the run up towards Remus. Ford versus Porsche. Straight line speed over stopping power. In towards turn 3 we go. At the inside goes McLean over Claffey. Claffey with a long way around. So we're going to go and catch on board directly with these two. On board here with Richard Claffey. Currently in the fight of 4th place then, up against himself and Jacob McLean. The tremendous cry of that flat 6. 11 minutes then left to go, and we're finally back into fighting in this race. Down through to turn 7 at the Würth curve. Running very far out wide though. Treading on very thin ice in this instance on the exit of turn 8. Now that places them side by side once again with a run up the inside for the Mustang. Watching here from the point of view of the Porsche, super late on the brakes to keep it very nearly up and alongside. Then has to tuck back in behind. What's the going rates? Down in towards turn 10. Sized his way to the inside in the hopes they would run himself out of ground, but McLean holds strong and stays up into 4th place. For Richard Claffey, he's got his chances here. 10.5 minutes onto lap 103 of this race. Down through the Niki Lauda curve, but as you can see, the sun has started to set beyond the horizon here. Conditions getting darker and darker by the moment. And compile that up against the limited visibility, and it is a recipe for disaster in some of these closer fights within the next 10 minutes. You see there, the back end is trying to swing itself away. And this is really the double-edged sword that Porsche has. For every time that Porsche has operated very well in the wet, it is a car that requires constant fettling, constant management. Otherwise, it will get the upper hand over you. And it is really, that's been the story of the Porsche 911. No matter the discipline, It is a car that requires constant maintenance when it comes to how does the setup work under these conditions? How do I best drive the car? Watching drivers try to transition from conventional GT3 options to a Porsche 911, I mean, it's a lot like going from trying to ride a bike to trying to pilot a fighter, like a fighter plane, I should say, even. It is a totally alien experience on most regards. Now, of course, there is transferable skill. I think maybe we are playing with a bit of hyperbole in the way we're describing it all. But for the Porsche, it is a car that requires a very unique, very specific driving style to get the most out of. The slightest deviation away from this very distinct pattern, and you've immediately created a car that will violently kill you. You see at the moment... weather's still set to continue for the next 10 minutes here, so we aren't seeing the rain go away by any stretch of the imagination. It only looked like the rain was going away because, well, it's kind of harder to actually see the rain with the sun setting. But Claffey now 1.5 seconds away from McLean, so McLean looks to take up the helm of 4th place at this time. Meanwhile, we do see this fight start to unfold. 7th place here. Luke Muscat versus Fisher Paykel. And we see on the exit here of Niki Lauda curve, just the conditions necessary to create this fight for 7th place on board with the Adept Rigs Aston Martin. A car we long thought to be out of contention for any more fights in today's race after whatever on earth happened in their bizarre pit stop not too long ago down towards Remus. And this is where it all starts to pick back up then. Half a second then between the BMW and the Aston on their way down towards turn 9. McLean has no lights on, suggests AXRL Shamian might get DSQ'd. Now, we have to investigate this ourselves because we have seen it to be an issue in the past. As you can see on our screens, McLean does have his lights on. I'm a little confused by that one because this is often a case where if drivers have had connection troubles, sometimes the car will disconnect then reconnect with no lights on, but for the driver it'll show the lights are still on and there's no issue there, but from our side it would show that they're still getting the meatball flag. So that is a curious one indeed. You see here for Fisher Paykel now stepping into the middle of it there, the How to Train Your Driver team, number 98. Now standing in between what was previously the fight of 7th. With Muscat moving over, that does invite the opportunity once again back on with the Aston. He has to run things out wide through Schlossgold. May very well have to forfeit position again to the approaching Paranihi. That fight for 7th just suddenly got kicked back into life there. Kiss Army Racing versus Adept Rigs Racing. Team formerly scheduled to race for Ferrari. Can barely get that word out. Now goes toe-to-toe with Aston Martin. Less than 5 minutes left to go then. And it all draws down to this. Or very nearly did by sounds of it. That bump on the exit of Red Bull Mobile comes at the worst possible time here. That created a gap somewhere in the ballpark of 7/10 between these two. on that last lap alone. 4.5 minutes left to go. Lap 105. We're functionally looking at 3 more laps of racing. That's as determined by the race leader there. So maybe just a little bit over. I think we might be just sneaking into a 4th by a couple seconds there for the leading 98. So you see there, something he wasn't hoping to have to do, but you see moving over as Fisher Paykel for the arrival of Isaac Paranihi. Ultimately, this has created a WOD large enough to cancel out that fight of 7th, and it may very well be a case here. They'll have to settle at the best of times for 8th, but we'll come to see that later on. In terms of McLean v Claffey, we would have thought this would have spread out further in the last time we last saw them, but only by 2 seconds here, meaning one slip up front from that 73 could bring this fight back into full swing by the end of this race. Having crossed the line a moment ago, just before the 3-minute mark, that does confirm our suspicions at least that we'll be seeing at least 3 more laps by the third coming way of the very thinnest of margins by just a couple of seconds over the line there for the leading driver at the moment, Anthony Joseph, otherwise known as Toothless, behind the wheel of the 98. You see here the other half of that fight. Kisami Racing Team, originally scheduled to race with Ferrari, now race with BMW, and a heel-turned decision seemingly overnight. They run in towards round 1 of the championship. Ultimately, seems to have been a decision worth making. The BMW a worthy choice, and we see that that's running on somewhat of a history then on this grid of drivers changing last second. Of course, the How to Train Your Driver team was originally slated to drive for McLaren. This move over to BMW, much like we've seen, even more to a greater extent than what we've seen here for the Kisami Racing Team, has proven to be a decision worth making. I'd just say that at the moment, but we saw in the background there, Paranihi dropped onto the gravel on the AXRL in towards turn 7 at the Worth curve, and that's created a huge issue for them there because it has completely killed off their chances to fight for the race win today. They'll have to settle at the best of it for 2nd place, but it has also, for just a fleeting moment there, reignited the hopes of a fight for 7th place between the Aston Martin and the BMW. Looking here for the 98 car. Do see here on board with them. Just curious to see how exactly they choose to pick up on this lap here. Bear in mind, with that most recent incident from Paranihi, they probably could afford to trim away a few seconds on their gap on the grounds that they get to the checkered flag after the timer. That means it doesn't require an extra lap. They don't run the risk of overextending on their stint. But I think in the case of both of these two, they've nothing really to worry about on that front. We do go back on board, Muscat v Paykel. The Aston Martin is back in the fight, so we are going to try and catch on board then with the Aston of Fisher Paykel. "20 seconds left to go." Now, it does raise a curious question here in the case of the leading BMW. Is it going to be a case where they're able to call things quits here? 10 seconds left to go. Heading down towards the line then. Is it going to be one more lap under the belt for these two as they make their way out round turn 10? You can see exactly what we thought they were going to do, pumping the brakes there as they make their way down towards the line at the end of the first race of the season here in the Southern Summer Endurance Series. It's How to Train Your Drivers number 98 for OTM. Anthony Joseph and Jacob Nielsen then, race winners here in the Red Bull Ring. A BMW 1-2 to the line then with the number 31, the amateurs team of Isaac Paranihi and Scott Smith, 2nd place. And then not far from the line then, we'll be seeing them down towards the very end of it. They also did put a premature halt on what could have been a very, very solid final lap dash between Luke Muscat and Fisher Paykel. 186 thousandths between the pair of them at the end of the race today. Heading down towards the line then, we'll not only be seeing the last of the podium sitters for GT3, we'll also be seeing down towards the line the GT4 division winner. That'll be Angus Dunk with Nova Sport down towards the line. Then we see Jared Sebastiano and Hudson Manuel. MWM's number 888 car down towards the line, 3rd place. And then we see down towards the line, joining them onto the podium, out through... well, not onto the podium, joining them on the sort of front row for their grid, down towards the line on the exit of turn 10. Your GT4 race winner then, the Chevrolet number 328, shows there as the 327, but it's the 328 Nova Sport Chevrolet of Angus Dunk. One-man operation, and he got that one nipped in the bud on the possible only round of GT4 we'll see. We see joining them on the podium then, Grant Schweikert with the Mango Racing number 469 BMW, and a multitude of DNFs today. Heading down towards the line at the end of proceedings there for the race winners. The last across the line, Jason Leatherby in the Roadblock Racing number 86. We'll see the full results there as they roll in. So, of course, Anthony Joseph wins alongside his teammate Jacob Nielsen. Then just running through the order, Parini 2nd, Sebastiano 3rd, McLean 4th, Claffey 5th, Leatherby 6th, Muscat 7th, Paykel 8th, Johnson 9th, Dunk 10th, and Schweikert in 11th. You can see there the wad of DNFs we've had so far across GT4 and GT3. A very interesting opening to the championship then. Of course, next round coming up will be a month from now. Round 2 of the championship comes up at the home of the Dutch Grand Prix, the Circuit Zandvoort. Until then, we've got to get preparations underway for the remainder of our broadcast day. If you'll be joining us later on, you have to give it about 2 hours. We'll be catching you for round 5 of the HCCL Multiclass Championship in Season 3, live from Bathurst, New South Wales, Australia. Until then, that's all from us here on TRTN. A wonderful way to start the season, and let's see where this one goes. That's all from us. Have a wonderful rest of your evening, or day for that matter, and take care.